Okay, it's 7 o'clock and we have a quorum present, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. The first item on our agenda, as always, is citizens' concerns. Residents are invited to make brief comments, no colloquy between the resident and the board. Yes, Ms. Fredericks.
Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I believe that the 40B manual still doesn't mention the state required process for dealing with historic structures. The Kmart is still listed as one of the top 10 most profitable Kmarts in the world, and so it's not going anywhere. I'm hoping that we can engage in eminent domain. I'd like to have a hearing on that to discover how much it would cost and whether the rent would cover that cost. I would like the board to consider at some point to officially change Columbus Day here in Acton to be Indigenous Peoples Day, to support people who live here as opposed to genocide. And then my last thing is I hope that at some point the board will consider revising the parking ban on town streets because the police have started to ticket people, and this is a direct target or a direct attack on the poorest, most vulnerable people who need to sleep someplace. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else with citizens' concerns? These are items that are not on our agenda that people just want to raise. All right. Next item is Chairman's update. First of all, I was at the Veterans Day ceremony on Saturday the 11th. Very nicely done. Again, by Gail Sawyer, who's sort of the celebrations organizer, as well as Vet Service Officer James McRae. The only thing I might complain about was the weather, because it was sunny with blue skies, but it was windy and it was really, really cold. But nice flag history ceremony. Two things that were different were, one, there was a tribute by a representative of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and there was also a presentation by the Concord, I think it's the old Concord chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, of a wreath honoring the veterans of Vietnam, the Vietnam War. The wreath had ribbons in red, green, and yellow, which apparently are the colors of the veterans, the Vietnam War Service Medal, something that I, as not a vet, didn't know. So, but very nice service. There is an opioid crisis public information session tomorrow, the 14th at 10:30 at the Human Services and Senior Center facility, the new senior center facility. You have to pre-register with the health department. So you can go online on the town website and find more information. There's a holiday fair sponsored by the Friends of the Council on Aging at, again, the Human Services and Senior Center facility on Saturday, November 18th, 9 to 2 p.m. There are gift items for purchase, raffles, breakfast and lunch available in the dining room. All proceeds go toward the Senior Center programs. There will be a walk of 161 Newtown Road, which is a parcel that will be under consideration for purchase at our December 4th special town meeting. The walk is sponsored by the Acton Conservation Trust. It is on Saturday, the 18th, 2 to 3 p.m. And you meet at the Church of Good Shepherd at Newtown and Arlington Roads. Chris Herron, whom some of you may remember as a Fall River native and former Boston Celtics player, will be back at Acton-Boxborough, the high school, to share his inspirational story of his recovery from addiction. It will be at the AB Auditorium next Monday, the 20th at 7 p.m. Those of us on this board won't be able to go, but it's free of charge. It's sponsored by a number of groups, including people at AB, the Acton-Boxborough United Way, Danny's Place, and also the town. CPR training again, Tuesday, the 21st, 5:30 p.m. at the Public Safety Facility. There's a $65 charge. You need to pre-register. More information on the town website. And those of you who haven't registered but are eligible to vote and you want to participate in our special town meeting on December 4th, please. The town clerk will be having special extended hours on Friday, November 24th from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Household Goods is doing a blanket collection, a blanket drive in collaboration with the Acton Real Estate Office. You can drop off gently used blankets and comforters at Acton Real Estate, which is located at 525 Mass Ave, number 105, or you can call that office for pickup. And if you're a League of Women Voters member and you're planning to attend the annual Chat and Cheer next month, someone will be collecting blankets there as well. The Board of Selectmen will be having a special meeting next Monday, November 20th at 7 p.m. in this room to reopen the hearing on the Nagog Pond Water Treatment Plant. One last note, the Chinese-American Civic Association, and particularly Yanni Gu, has asked me whether there was some way to schedule a get-together for socializing and education purposes between the selectmen and the Civic Association. Originally, she had talked about the end of the year. I told her that would probably not be an optimal time, and I suggested maybe the end of the year after town meeting. So more to come on that. And finally, I understand, I have heard through the rumor mill that today is Joan Gardner's birthday. So happy birthday, Joan, and many happy returns. And Mr. Manager, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, can't top that. Just to give a plug for the CPR class, I took it 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the 2 firefighters that put it on, just terrific. Hopefully I'll never have to use the skills that I've just learned, but it was really, really great. We're in the process right now, mainly working budget. I'll be presenting the recommended budget on the 18th of December, so we're kind of getting in the final stages of finalizing the budget. Lisa did send out an email to the board because we're losing a regular meeting because of the special town meeting, whether people would be available Monday, December 11th to kind of have the makeup from missing the December 4th. So I think she's heard from a majority, but not from everybody, but I'm assuming we're okay on that. And just the only other thing I just wanted to bring up is I won't be able to attend next Monday's meeting. I'm having a medical procedure that day, and I'm not allowed to drive for 24 hours afterwards, so have fun without me.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. That's a tough choice, right? Anyhow, we have a hearing, so I'll read the notice. The Acton Board of Selectmen public hearing to be held on, okay, this is strange. Well, it's supposed to be, it says October 30th, it's being held right now, November 13th at 7:10 p.m. in Town Hall, Francis Faulkner, room 204, to discuss the proposed regulations for the administration of the following general bylaw, Chapter X, Stormwater Management and Erosion and Sediment Control. Proposals, I think that means drafts, are available at the Land Use Department and Town Clerk's office. Can I edit this and return this to you? So if you would just introduce yourselves for the benefit of our audience here and at home, and then take it away. Thank you.
My name is Selby. I'm Director of Land Use and Economic Development.
Paul Campbell, Town Engineer.
And this bylaw was passed at the November special town meeting 2 years ago, 2015. And sometime in the last, 18 months or so, the board designated jointly the Land Use Department and the Engineering Department as the implementing authorities for the bylaw. So Paul and I have worked diligently on preparing draft regulations for your consideration for approval tonight. Paul can give a brief presentation to update the community about the purpose of this bylaw and the regulations.
So basically the bylaw is just intended to address gaps in jurisdiction for stormwater management. So we have a number of processes in town right now. If a project is near a wetland, Conservation Commission enforce the stormwater regulations there. If a project is a certain use, size, or, that requires a site plan special permit or subdivision, there's stormwater regulation there. But there's a number of projects that just are kind of in the gaps between those. So the purpose of the bylaw was to address those gaps, and the regs are written so that they're pretty much the same standards that we have for everything else, just applying to these new projects. So a couple projects in particular, A&R subdivisions, which are by right subdivisions, subdividing land along a road that already exists, where you build multiple houses. Something like that would be regulated under this bylaw. And basically the bylaw is just to control size of projects. It's not really concerned with the use and the type like a special permit would. So there's a couple triggers: 1 acre disturbance of land. If you're taking down a whole bunch of trees and disturbing 1 acre land, it's going to trigger this bylaw. Or if you're creating a certain amount of impervious surfaces, pavement, buildings, things like that, it'll trigger this bylaw. So we try to write it really carefully so that it just kind of mimics everything else that we do already today. And then it also helps us with our MS4 permit, which is the town's permit with the EPA to regulate stormwater. So this thing will be updated as that becomes like a more final permit. So that's basically the summary of it. So if you want to go through it.
I didn't know, we have, I don't know if this was the slideshow that you said was very long.
Yeah.
And time consuming.
Yeah.
It doesn't look long and time consuming in our packet, but maybe there's a lot of talking going on. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of details in there. We can get into specifics, but it's basically, this is exactly what we do now. You do this already for site plan special permits, the NAGOG treatment plant. You already do this for that type of stuff. So, so we probably don't have to get into the details of how we regulate stormwater.
I don't know if you happen to have the slides loaded on the, or not. I mean, you don't have to talk in detail about each slide, but I think because it's been a couple of years since the bylaw itself was adopted, and a lot of people don't really talk a lot about stormwater infiltration and all that sort of thing. It might, if you can pick out the really hot slides and talk about.
So I think I already talked about when it applies. The purpose: control and manage, treat stormwater runoff, minimize flooding, protect groundwater, which is important for Acton because Acton's sole source of water, drinking water, is from the ground, and preventing pollutants from entering the MS4, which is our stormwater system out in the streets. So it's a Federal Clean Water Act. This is in compliance with that. MS4. So here's an overview of stormwater, just in case anybody's questioning what we're talking about here. Rain hits people's roofs, water, roadways, picks up pollutants, enters the storm drain, goes into a storm sewer, and then out into the outlet, out into a stream or a wetland or something like that. So the purpose of this bylaw is to protect things before they get into that storm drain and before they get out to the water bodies. This is the MS4 permit requirements. This bylaw is going to help us with 2 of the requirements: construction site control and post-construction stormwater management. So construction site runoff control, this is during construction when you see a lot that gets stripped. You see some poor, where no erosion control. All of this is just going to come and silt and into the catch basin and then grab pollutants. This is what you would use to protect this catch basins to stop pollutants from entering in and then going down. And this is proper erosion control on a slope to kind of slow down runoff during construction. And this is post-construction stormwater management. You have infiltration basins that'll collect stormwater, let it settle here, infiltrate into the ground, or slowly run off site. You have some what do they call these here? Rain gardens that'll treat stormwater and infiltrate into the ground. And these you see in parking lots. These are underground stormwater detention basins. They're basically underground versions of this, but it does the same thing. It just puts water into the ground, and that's the name of the game, is trying to put it into the ground because it treats it better. So these were like existing processes that we have right now. Conservation Commission, they manage stormwater 100 feet from a wetland or 200 feet from a river, and the standards are here in the Mass Stormwater Handbook and the Acton Wetland Bylaw. And then you guys are familiar with the site plan, special permits. Planning Board manages definitive subdivisions, and their standards are found here. So, yeah, so these are the thresholds where our new Bylaw X applies. It's not so much concerned about project's use or where it's located. It cares about how much disturbance you're doing. So creation of a new impervious pavement area. If you're disturbing areas on a steep slope, 10% or greater, or this is the big one, areas of common development. Those are the A&R subdivisions where they weren't regulated before. So we're just consolidating all of our different processes into this one. And these are just some by right developments that have occurred in town that will now be, if this was going to come up after this passed. So like the Monument Place up in North Acton, that happened a couple years back, and that was a by right development. So there wasn't much stormwater management there. They actually did design it just because that's, the engineers did it on their own volition, but it wasn't managed. Approval will not require subdivision. There's one on Main Street. I'll show an example. And Eden's Plaza, where they're tearing up a parking lot and redoing it. This will now be, controlled under this process. So, Monument Village, something like this. This was all by right building permits. This is over by the Dunkin' Donuts and the hardware store. These 4 lots. This was created without any stormwater plan. So basically, we made these rules and regs using everything we had right now, and the Mass Stormwater Handbook. We use those as minimum guidelines, and wherever Acton had a more stronger guideline, we just went with the Acton guidelines. And the permit process, like I said, it mimics the notice of intent and the site plan special process we already do now. Everything that we do now is going to be unaffected. So if something comes in front of you, they're not going to have to apply with us later on. Most of the applicants are going to be consultants that are familiar with stormwater management. So this isn't going to be, Joe homeowner coming in and having to do this. So in the timeline for these permits are 30 days, just like a building permit. So we're expecting people to apply for the building permit and these permits at the same time. And there's no public hearing, but there is public input. So we have to post these permits online and in the newspaper, and we have to take in public comment, just like we would have. So we came up with the fees. We had to track how much time it would take to do these permit reviews. Basically, we followed your fee policy based on administrative time of the permit. And we basically, since we have similar processes now, like the site plan special permit, we just kind of estimated what our time is on those, and we kind of came up with the fees. So most people are going to be exempt. There's a lot of exemptions in the bylaw. We came up with 2 different classes of permit types. Everybody's going to have some form of erosion control when they're doing construction. They're going to have to put out some sort of, to keep everything from going out into the street or into wetlands or et cetera, et cetera. But not every project is going to have detention basins and things that are like actually designed. So we have these 2 different permit types. They'll go through the same process, but we just need less information for the first type than the second type. And then, land use and DPW are the implementing authorities. So So stormwater management, passed 2 years ago, complying with federal and state requirements, and most importantly, protecting and acting groundwater, which is very important here. So that's it.
Great, and that took all of about 7 minutes, so, so that was great. Are there questions, comments from the board? Katie?
All right, well, thank you both for putting this together and the work you did to put together the regulations. My only 2 questions, so I just want to confirm that you guys are the implementing authority, so these do not have to come before the Board of Selectmen. Okay, excellent.
Correct.
That's our preference. And then you mentioned that this mostly will be impacting developers, and so people who know about general regulations like this. So are you planning any kind of education, or do you feel like most of the people that are going to have to pull one of these permits are people that deal with these kinds of regulations in other cities or towns and wouldn't need to know any the intricacies of Acton's?
Yeah, I tried reaching out, like, I when we were writing these, I actually wanted some input from the people that were gonna be applying, and there wasn't much. It was pretty much, tell us what you want, and we'll do it. So, like, I don't expect much input. It's gonna be a learning process with them, but, yeah. But we also are required in our new MS4 permit to go out and target certain groups, so like.
To provide education.
To provide training, so they would be a group, but, yeah, we're just gonna kind of slowly work this in over the winter.
Okay, great, excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Joe? No? Peter?
I saw that you had an ability, if a permit's denied, to appeal, but there's no standards, there's no description of what the process is, or who you appeal to, or who makes the appellate decision. Can you explain that a little bit?
I think it's, yeah, there is an appeal process in the bylaw, in the bylaw, and I think it jumps right to, like, to a court, right? Like, there isn't anybody local with the appeal process.
Oh, okay, I didn't go back and reread the bylaw, so that's where it would be, okay.
It's outlined in the bylaw.
Yeah.
Okay, then my other question is, hasn't the EPA come out with requirements for upgraded MS4 permits? And I'm understanding that's been put off for a year or something. We're gonna have to redo these in the future?
The regs as drafted are in concert with the existing, I think it was the 2016 general permit, which has been stayed for a year. So that required, the only difference is that required the first inch of runoff be captured and treated. And the state DEP stormwater standards only required the first half inch. Local regulations already required in Acton the first inch. So this is consistent with the 1 inch, which was already existing in Acton and is required under the new federal general permit when it becomes effective.
Okay, thank you.
Jing-Sung, anything? Okay. Yeah, I think there's a reference in the draft regulations to the fact that the regs are in compliance with the whichever year laws is in effect. I have a question about, because I saw something, I save everything, and it was dated back to February when I think maybe you were originally going to do a presentation, you didn't, but I was looking at, you had slides, and then you also had, as part of the slides, you had a draft that was redlined, and then there were comments in purple, and it looked as if the person making the comments in purple was an attorney, but I wasn't sure. I didn't know if, and then I made the mistake of trying to sort of compare drafts, that version, I had to convert them anyhow, and I ended up with a big mess that was incomprehensible, and I couldn't tell if you had just incorporated all of the, whatever council or whoever it was that made the purple comments, purple prose anyhow, but.
We did run these by town council,
Okay.
and all the comments were incorporated.
Okay, and then have you gotten input from like the Water District, Planning Board, and some of the departments, conservation, or?
Within the land use department and,
Yeah.
and public works departments,
So it
yes.
reflects-
We did not reach out to the greater boards because we figured the enforcement of all of those regulations are within in-house. So we just relied on our in-house expertise.
I mean, one of my suggestions would be to sort of just let the water district know, because obviously you're talking about groundwater zones. They may have some perspective, or they may be fine with it. I think that just, they have an interest in that sort of thing. And then I just have one comment. I can send it's an edit to the permit checklist. It's a nit pick, but I'll just send it to you. It's the first line of the permit checklist, and it has singular and then it has plural anyhow, and it mixes them, and that sort of thing drives me crazy. So I will send you my edit, okay? But otherwise, thank you very much for doing this. Did you use a template, or did you? I mean, cutting and pasting and borrowing from other drafts is, a very time-honored tradition in the public sector. So I didn't know if you actually sat there, poor Paul, sitting there drafting from scratch, or if you...
No, I used the site plan special permit process, and then there was a lot of superfluous stuff in there that I didn't need, but yeah.
Okay, great. And then you, as you said, you had council review it, which is
Yeah.
helpful. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Any other questions or comments from the board? If not, okay, audience members.
Sarah Fredericks, West Acton. Mostly I have questions. Is this that you're deciding tonight for regulations that are outside of the bylaw, or that would be part of the bylaw?
These are regulations pursuant to the bylaw.
So
There's it's like when you have legislation, you have regulations that are adopted or promulgated by the enforcing agency or office. Well, that's what these are. So they're pursuant to, authorized by, and in accordance with the bylaw, which was adopted 2 years ago.
And so they could be changed by yet another vote of the Board of Selectmen, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That was actually intentional, because it provides more flexibility in the event that, for example, I mean, if we had this MS4 new permit finally goes into effect, which is a little more stringent, then obviously we're probably going to have to do some tweaking of perhaps the bylaw, and the regulations will follow. But in the event that in the interim there are changes that the implementing officials want to make, they can make it with our approval, and we don't have to go to town meeting. It provides a little more flexibility.
And so then with that, the ability to loosen these regulations would take a simple vote of the Board of Selectmen.
I think the regs are, the bylaw was written that the Mass Stormwater Handbook was the minimum standard, so that's been in effect for the last 18 months, and then these are above the Mass Stormwater, so.
So these are tighter.
These are tighter, yeah.
Okay. I noticed the exemptions, and I'm curious as to whether the exemptions are already provided for in the bylaw, or whether the exemptions are provided in the regulation.
The exemptions are from the bylaw. They're repeated in the regs.
So could we use a regulation to take those exemptions out?
No.
Because I noticed that about half of the construction is exempt.
Much of it is reviewed in other ways. So like a site plan special permit that comes before the Board of Selectmen, if you read through our zoning regulations, they have to abide by various stormwater standards. Same with anything that's filed within 100 feet of a wetland or 200 feet of a river. It goes through the Conservation Commission through a notice of intent process, and that project also has to abide by Mass Stormwater standards.
And what about single-family residents that are also exempt?
Those are largely exempt, given the thresholds that were set forth in the bylaw.
Are you saying that the thresholds may trigger it anyway, or are you saying that the thresholds are ignored?
Yeah, a single-family house has to be under the threshold. It has to be outside of zones 1 and 2 of the groundwater protection district, and then there's one other thresholds, and not part of a common development like an A&R. So, like a developer can't take a lot, split it into 4, and just say, well, this 1/4 is under the threshold, this 1/4, like all 4 of them count together towards the threshold number, so.
I think what you're saying is, let me see if I may correct if I'm wrong, that like 90% is covered somewhere with some similar type, I get any nods for that? Okay.
Yeah.
May I continue with a couple more questions?
Sure.
The land removal aspect, we already have an earth removal limit in our bylaw already. And it doesn't seem to me that it's really doing much good. And so I guess while we're talking about earth removal, which is part of this, I'd like to ask if we are enforcing that earth removal limit in our bylaw. I guess that's a question for you, Selby, then. I'd like you to look and see the earth removal bylaw that we already have in the general bylaw, and I'd like to get a formal response as to what the process is to ensure that they're not breaking that law, because they seem to be taking a lot of earth out of these sites. So I'd like that question answered. Okay, so the notification, is that also a butter notification, or is it only the paper?
It's only in the paper.
On the newspaper. Can we have it say abutters too? I mean, if they're paying for it, we should make them pay, I think, for
Yeah, the bylaw gave the implementing authority discretion whether to do notification. So we decided internally the erosion control type 1 minimum, those won't have a butter notification, just the newspaper. The type 2 where they're having stormwater and there's going to be a pond and things like that, that will trigger the notification.
Okay, I have one comment, which I'll save for the end, but my request is that when you have major regulations like this, that there be a process that is more inclusive. I really only stumbled on this hearing when I opened the agenda for today, so we didn't have Land Use Committee and Green Acton didn't have a chance to review this. The people that are working on the NAGOG water, those folks didn't have a chance to review it. The AWD Land Use Advisory Committee didn't have a chance to review this. So I feel like that in terms of our own process, in terms of regulation and policy, that we, I think, need to give a bigger heads up on what this is. Because I saw Chapter X and I just thought it was, you know, I don't know, to review it. I had seen that on the upcoming meetings. So I wish that we would do more of that to be more inclusive. And my last comment is that I think there's a reason why the developers didn't comment. I feel like there's so much money in there for them that they don't even bother. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other audience comments about this?
Good evening. Danny Factor, 11 Davis Road. Hi, Selby, Paul. Just one question, and it's related to one thing that Tara was asking. Is there a date that this regulation would then go into effect? Would that be immediately or?
Immediately upon vote of the Board of Selectmen.
Right. I'm one of the directors of Green Acton. Tara is another Board of Director member, and I've actually just been in touch by text with Jim Snyder-Grant, who's another director who's watching this on TV. Would you be willing, prior to enactment, if Green Acton did have some questions or wanted to consult with you, would that be, would you be willing to do that prior to putting this into effect? I can't speak from Green Acton because, as a board, because this happened so quickly, but if Green Acton did have some comments, would you be willing to do that before putting this into effect?
I hesitate to say yes, because if a developer drops off a building permit application tomorrow for something that would trigger the bylaw, I would not want to have this bylaw in place, or the regulations in place for us to administer this portion of the bylaw.
Would you be willing to amend the proposal so that the board would vote on this going into effect at some prospective date?
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other audience comments about the proposed stormwater regulations? All right. Board members, I don't know if you have any opinions about this proposal to get input from other groups in town. I would like to have the Water District weigh in on the draft, but I don't know if anybody has any other suggestions.
I think we should put them in effect now, and if there are comments and a need to update it, then we can come back and update them later. But as Selby said, if we have somebody coming now or tomorrow with a permit, I'd rather have our stricter regulations in place now to deal with that and make sure these are being handled in a better way in the interim, rather than waiting, because that can end up being, I mean, our agendas are pretty packed, and that's probably going to be the next year by the time we get to vote this again. So rather than push this off for 2 months, let's vote them now and if we update them, we update them.
No, and especially because the amendment of the regulations is so much more simply done, which was part of the reason for doing it. Some people may think that, oh, there's, a risk that it'll be undemocratic, but, the fact is there's a certain amount of trust you have to have when you're dealing with the Board of Selectmen as the approving authority and getting input from town staff. You have to trust that people are actually looking out for the general public interest and not the developers or whatever, just alone. So, all right, does anybody want to move to?
I'll move for the Board of Selectmen to adopt the stormwater management, erosion, and sediment control regulations.
Okay, Katie moves and Joan seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. Thank you very much, both of you, for all of your work on this, and I'm glad we're moving forward, because you have 2 points out of the 6 that eventually the town is going to have to comply with, so we're just, checking off the list. It's great.
You're welcome. My apologies for giving you an old legal ad to read.
Don't worry about it. Thanks. All right, next item up is under Selectmen's business, the RFP review for 43 School Street. I don't know who's, Mr. Manager, are you?
I'll kick it off and turn it to Selby.
Okay.
As you may recall, back at the annual town meeting, 43 School Street, the town had acquired through back taxes. It has been a duplex building that has really had no electricity, no heat for probably 20 years. We're able to relocate the resident who has not paid taxes since, I think, 1992 to Windsor Green. And town meeting authorized us to dispose of the property for affordable housing purposes. So based on that, Selby developed a request for proposals, and you have the one and only proposal in front of you tonight, and I'll turn it to Selby to walk through that.
So, as Manager Ledoux said, we issued an RFP, request for proposals, to dispose of 43 to 45 School Street for affordable housing purposes. We had originally offered it to the Housing Authority because we could have done that without an RFP process, but they were not interested. Prior to developing the RFP, we did reach out to Habitat for Humanity to see if they were interested, because if they weren't, then we didn't think that we'd get any interest whatsoever. So we did issue the RFP. Habitat was interested. I was also reached out by 2 other potential respondents. Once they evaluated the RFP, they decided that there was not enough profit to be made for them, or any profit for them to make, because of our requirements to have these be deed restricted affordable housing, subject to income restrictions in accordance with the Subsidizing Housing Authority under the DHCD. So Habitat for Humanity did respond to the RFP, and they are offering the town $1. And in order for this to really work for them, they are also seeking a couple of grants from the Community Preservation Committee. One thing that Nancy Tavernier from the ACHC raised was whether or not the property would be eligible for affordable housing CPA funds, because the property wasn't acquired with CPA funds. Her idea was for the ACHC to give $1, which they received from CPA, to Habitat, and for Habitat then to acquire that with CPA funds, which would give them a lot more flexibility in terms of applying for grants from the CPA. So I ran that up the flagpole with council. Council said yes, that would be fine, because seeing as their proposal was only for $1. And also we vetted what they were planning to apply for, and it seemed like all but maybe $2,000 of what they were asking for CPA affordable housing funds would be eligible anyway. So what you have before you is their response as well as their price proposal for the RFP. They don't have all of their contractors lined up at the moment. They will have an on-staff general contractor taking care of the rehabilitation of the project. They have been meeting with the Historic District Committee, or at least the chair of the Historic District Committee. When I did the walkthrough with Habitat, I invited the chair of the Historic District Committee to come along because they hadn't seen the house. Their main concern is the exterior, that's their jurisdiction, and retaining the original windows and doors. So it looks like they're applying for a grant to help them bridge the gap between what they normally budget for windows and doors and what the increase in cost will be to rehab the existing windows and doors for the property. The siding will be sanded and that will be retained, so it won't be vinyl clad. It will retain the existing wooden shingles that are on the house now. I think that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you. I think this is a great outcome. It's very creative, and yeah, I couldn't believe it when council said okay to $1 from ACHC from the CPA funds. But, you know, the fact is there's other leverage, so to speak. I mean, the town is foregoing a huge amount of taxes, and so I think there's other leverage to deemed contribute to the purchase. So any comments, questions from the board? Peter, do you have anything, because you're CPA?
Yeah, we just received the application this week. We're having a meeting on Thursday where we'll go over all the CPA applications. The deadline, I think, was today, actually. But the only thing I'd point out when you talk about real estate taxes is included in this proposal is a condition that the taxes be calculated on the sale of the property as opposed to the full market value of the property. That goes way back when the ACHC approached the assessors a long time ago and proposed that so that these affordable homeowners could afford to pay the taxes. The assessors have put that policy in place that it's really the sales price of the property. I mean, I don't know what a dollar means in that context, but...
Well, I believe that these will be resold. So I think we can then levy property taxes based on the sale price to an affordable buyer.
Okay, so Habitat has a lot. They pick a person to live in the property. I mean, there's another property down on River Street that Habitat did that's a great addition to the neighborhood, great neighbors. So they pick a person who does a lot of the sweat equity to help build the property, and then they actually pay money to purchase the property.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Katie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Habitat. I thought it was a very thorough and well thought through application. My only question is about what happens if they don't receive the CPA grants or the full amount. So is there a sort of backup plan for how to get that money? Would it impact the ability to, preserve the historic aspects or, as you said, make up that difference in the cost between, what they typically budget for windows and doors and that kind of thing and what, would be fitting with the historic nature of the house and the fact that it's in the historic district?
I wish I had an answer for you. I do see Carolyn
Yes.
here. I think
Would you mind
I
just
would
coming to the
defer
microphone?
to Carolyn for this.
Thank you. Tara, can you let Carolyn answer, please?
Oh, sure.
Hi, Carolyn Reed, Executive Director with Habitat and CM, and we're very excited to have the possibility to build in Acton again. So in the absence of the CPA funds, and we know it's an application process and not guaranteed, we would just delay the start time. We'd need to raise the funds privately.
Okay. And then do you have a family picked out already, or is that an application process that you do, you do once you have this?
Right, we
Yeah.
don't open the application process until we have a building permit.
Okay.
Until we know we can have the property.
And is there any preference for people who already live in, families that already live in Acton, or how does that
My
work?
understanding is that's up to the town. If you apply for local preference, then we will run a lottery with local preference.
Okay, great, excellent. Well, thank you very much. Like I said, I thought it was a really, really well put together application, and look forward to having you here again.
Yeah, thank you.
Ching-Sung, Joan, anything? Okay. And I have no questions. I'm just really pleased with this project. So, audience.
Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I am so excited. I love this project for so many reasons. I have some questions. Because we're giving the property for free, and perhaps even paying for a goodly or maybe all of the construction costs, I think we're in a position to ask that it go to very low, extremely low, and maybe even have our own first purchase, maybe in all of Massachusetts, that is an extremely low income person. and I hope that you strongly consider that. I don't know if we have the power to put that as a condition, because I think that the costs would be within that, so that would be very exciting for me. The other thing is environmental concerns. The old windows, these old houses, often are way better than anything you can grow with new wood from unsustainable forests, whereas the old wood that came from very old growth trees, you can't replace that. And the old glass, to refurbish that, they'll last 100 years, as opposed to a new window will last for 10 or 20 years. And we have people locally that know how to do that and can do it really affordably. So you're nodding, I'm hoping that's because you plan to do that.
If you could go to the mic, if you have a response, that would be great.
So in order to put in the request to the CPC, we did meet with someone from the Historical Commission and someone who refinishes historic windows to try to get a quote on that. So it is our hope to be able to do that if we can do it and make economic sense.
Thank you. Tara, you
I'll
have
just
more?
put out a shout out for Paul Swider, who does that. He's a local Acton, yay, Acton high school person that we know. And then I just want to put a pitch in for doing this more, because we have a ton of these little ranches with 2 or 3 bedrooms that are just tiny, and if we'd be in a position to buy these and you'd be in a position to take over construction stuff, I'd be so excited to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other audience comments, questions about this proposal? All right, board. Yep.
I will move to, you want to approve or accept, award the RFP for 43 School Street to Habitat for Humanity, North Central Massachusetts.
Katie moves and Joan seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstaining. Congratulations, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie. All right, Acton-Boxborough Building Project Presentation. I'm not too far behind, like within 5-10 minutes. I'm tough.
Welcome to Douglas School. On the first floor, we have a small conference room and storage. The entrance to the conference room is through a reading instruction room. Here in the conference room, we have most of our special education meetings. This space is densely packed and less than appropriate for parent meetings. The storage area houses all of our curricular supplies and janitorial materials. It is a dirt-floored area with sewage pipes that you must duck under to get from one part to another, creating hazards for all that enter. Our counselor's office is a modified large storage closet. It is just enough space for the 3 adults who work in here with children. The Douglas School Library is in one of our 2 newest modulars. It is 11 years old. Because of space limitations, our shelves of books go up higher than traditional shelves. This makes it very difficult for younger students to get books. The Douglas School Gymnasium is a 3/4 size gym that is heavily used every period of the day. It has non-adjustable basketball hoops and a heating system that is very difficult to regulate. Our cafetorium serves our 400 students lunch and is used for assemblies as well. The stage is non-handicapped accessible. The cafeteria is designed for only 250 students and makes for a very densely packed assembly area. The entrance to our 22-year-old art, music, and special ed modulars is through the back of the cafeteria. The art room sink is on the outside of the art room down the hall. The art room is a carpeted space, very difficult to clean, and again, very densely packed, making group work and projects a challenge. The Douglas School has a beautiful set of playing fields that adjoin with the Gates School via a boardwalk through our wetlands. Unfortunately, the playing fields are completely handicapped, inaccessible because of their proximity to a hill. There's a ramp to the playgrounds, but the steep incline makes it unusable. Each classroom, K-2, has an outside entrance to the playgrounds. Unfortunately, these two are handicapped inaccessible, and lack of storage makes for very densely packed classrooms. The school is not wheelchair accessible. Students must be wheeled outside to access the cafetorium, gym, art, and music. Each day, 400 students arrive and are dismissed from Douglas School. Our bus drop-off and pickup area is commingled with parking and makes for a very densely populated area with many safety concerns. Traffic on Elm Street often backs up because of the difficulty buses.
So I think you probably get the gist of what we're dealing with here at Douglas, which is one of the schools that we're talking about. So first of all, thank you very much. My name is Dennis Bruce, and I'm on the school committee, and Marie Altieri and I are here to present the school building project presentation. We'll make this a shorter one than what has really been going on in the community in the last month as we get prepared for special town meeting on December 4th. So there are a few slides in this presentation that I wanted to review with everybody as a precursor to the whole what's coming up here next month. And Marie's graciously sitting here and will answer questions and help with the conversation. Amy was supposed to be here. My apologies. She's ill, so she asked that we step in, which we gladly did. And then we'll go through this. So let me, this was one of the slides. And so just really from an overall perspective, the school building project, we have a special town meeting on the 4th. This has been, we're in year three of the master plan, which started a few years ago. As we looked into the replacement of some of our schools, we are partnered with MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Association, which is quite a process. It's very lengthy, but it's worth it if you get in. We were one of 87 submittals that went through, and one of 17 that were selected. Okay, so the process that we're going through now, we're following what they're guiding us to maximize the reimbursement as much as we can. All right, so hold on, just go through. This is another one, as you see, as I mentioned, we're in probably year 4 or year 3 or whatever. We started in 2015. You can see the phases, so we're entering phase 4 of this entire project, which is going to be probably 7-9 years, depending on approval processes and construction. And let me go through. So of the many options that we have, I wanted to get to this one. Excuse me, girl, 1 second. As you can tell, there's a lot of PowerPoints in here. So this is the preferred option that we're presenting and that we're going to be pursuing if things go well. So it's a twin school that would be built for the 2 pre-K and elementary schools. The Gates property is the first site that we're going to be looking at, okay? We will explore Conant and other possible sites as needed, but we're going to focus on Gates at first. It's the preferred site that we have come up with, but there's still a lot of work to do, okay? So Gates and school property will be treated as a campus, all right? Similar to what we've done with Carthytown and Merriam, so we'll treat this as a campus. The school initially, we think, will be built on the Gates side, okay? parking, playgrounds, all that will be built onto the Douglas side of the proposed campus, and there'll be a walkable bridge that will go between both sites. If this happens, we'll be able to have construction take place while both schools are in session. So we won't have to displace any of the children and be good. We can build it right by, or hopefully we'll be building it right by where the softball field is. And then once that is completed, both Douglas and Gates will be torn down after that, okay? Douglas would be moved into one side, Gates would be moved into the other side of the building. And project description. So from this standpoint, we'd have 21 K through 6 classrooms. We'd have art and music classrooms would be separate. Special education classrooms would be available to us, and then also small group instructional spaces for English language learners, reading, counseling, speech and language, OT, PT, things that have become more and more common in our school system now over the years, as opposed to when Gates and Douglas and Conant were first built, and then things have changed greatly. We'd also have 8 preschool classrooms that would be built, and with support services that go along with that. Again, for special education students with speech, language, occupational, and physical therapy. Preschool students would have access to art, music, physical education in the elementary school, something they actually don't have access to right now based on the age of the building that it's currently in. There's an artist rendition of what it could potentially look like. Okay, and let me see, where's the other one? So let's get to the costs, because I think that's, okay, we'll start with this one, okay. So December 4th, what are we talking about? So we need to vote to approve funds for the feasibility study. So we, right now that feasibility study is looking at $1.3 million. MSBA has committed to a reimbursement of 45.3%. So that would be $590,000. So that means the Acton-Boxborough School District be responsible for the $710,000, but again, that would be allocated from E&D, which we have already voted upon, and now we just need special town meetings approval in both Acton and in Boxborough, which will be happening at the same time, and need the approval to spend actually the money that is that we set aside from E&D. So at this point, there is no increase at all to the taxpayers of the town. So what's the 1.3 going to be used for? So we will need to do a site survey. So as you can see, we're trying to put a contingency plan in place because we haven't put any site money into any site survey at all at the Gates property. So we'll have to go through that. So we'll be looking at wetlands, boundaries, ledge, traffic. And the money will go to architectural fees, to the owner's project manager, and it'll go to that first site. And if that site is not found to be acceptable, then we will move to the next site, and the next site will be at the Conant property. And at that point, then it becomes Douglas and Conant that we'd be looking at, because Douglas is the one that's been approved. Okay, even though we're proposing a twin school, it revolves around Douglas. And as you can see from the video, there's a lot of reasons why we went with Douglas first. So, but and if we don't hit that site, then there are other options that we'll start looking into from where we could go. Anything with the 1.3 million, anything that left can be rolled back into the project. Again, it just doesn't have to be sent on the whole site survey or this phase of the project. The projected costs so far, so we've been working with Dorr and Whittier up to this point in the master plan. And as you can see up here, we're looking anywhere between $100 to $120 million for an overall project. MSBA reimbursement for these types of projects averages between 40 to 45%, so that could be anywhere between 40 to 54 million. You'll see the estimated the estimated AB regional share, and then the next line item will be the Acton share, and then the Boxborough share if the enrollment stays on the whole 85-15 split that we're currently at now. So let me go to this one. So in this slide here, which is the last one I'll show tonight, but one that I think is important, we have to do something, okay? And we have 3 older buildings that have not really had any major updates in the last, I don't think ever, actually. They've had updates, but not major ones. So we're going to be spending money, and then we took a look at our options, and then we've gone this route with the twin building, and then also too, we could go another route and do repairs and get up to ADA compliance. There's pluses and minuses for both, but the way we look at it is from an MSBA perspective, right now, we've been accepted for the Douglas School, which gives us the ability to knock off 2 of them. So from a reimbursement perspective, again, anywhere between 40 to 45%. So you can see the net cost there. If we went the twin building route versus going just the repair route. The Boxborough share, the Acton share, but I think the most important part is, we have a 50-year lifespan for what we could build with the twin school versus repairs that could have a 10-year lifespan. So we address all the deficiencies, but there are space needs which would not be addressed. So we believe from a long-term perspective and investment in the school system, we'd be looking at the twin, we opted for the new twin building route. We think it's the best use of the town's resources. It gives us the ability to go through the MSBA process, which is very rigid and some standards we have to meet, but we've met them along the way, and again have been included. So we think it's prudent to be going down that path. Okay. Oh yeah, let me go back, sorry. That one right there. Okay, yeah.
Just interestingly, this slide shows the current debt service and the future debt service for what's currently on the books. What's in blue is Town of Acton. What's in pink is the Regional School District. The large majority of this is the previous round of school projects. So the Acton Public, McCarthy Town Mary and Parker Damon building is in the blue because at that time it was Town of Acton. So if this were to go forward, the twin school borrowing we're anticipating would happen around 2023 because short-term interest only until the project's complete. So you'll see at that point it would go a little bit higher than it is now, but then about 3 years later it essentially fills the gap of the drop-off because all the school projects would be paid off by then, and it kind of comes back to where it is today. So just wanted to kind of show folks that. Is that it? Great, thank you. That was really interesting, and I'm glad a number of us on this board are pretty familiar with the building project because I think we've been to so many presentations, but I thought it would be good to have just sort of a quick overview, and you did fabulously in just highlighting the things that I thought this board should hear, as well as some of the audience members. So are there questions, comments from the board? Katie.
Sure, thank you both for coming tonight. And I just first wanted to commend the district on the process that I think you've gone through to get here and the public process that you've done to get to the preferred option and toward this request. I think I've heard some versions of this, many times over the past few years at your various meetings, and I think it was even, I believe, over a year ago that the district invited the Selectmen and Finance Committee to tour Douglas, and I went on that, and you saw the basement, and we walked under the pipes, and the fact that, there's OT and PT happening in a storage closet or a hallway or the side of the cafetorium stage, which is frankly just unacceptable for both the teachers and the students. We're not serving their needs. Special ed and ELL are happening all in one room with multiple kids being serviced by different people and no dividers, and it's very difficult. So the need is clearly there, and I think you've gone through a very good process to get to the recommended option. The only things I wanted to highlight or sort of ask you to clarify are considerations like how energy efficient this building would be, and if you'd go for LEED certification, things like that. That happens during the feasibility study stage or the design stage? You don't have the answers to those questions right now.
Yeah, so definitely during the design phase, but we will do as much as we can to be as energy efficient as we can. The district has awards for being nationally recognized for energy efficiency. In addition to that, MSBA reimburses at a higher rate for the more energy efficient the project is. So,
and you do get a bump for being a regional district as well. I thought you used to, at least. I don't know if they do anymore, but it used to be that they gave you a little bit more if you were regionalized as well. So hopefully that's still the case, but perhaps not any longer. And then do you think that there's enough money into this proposed feasibility study to do the thorough analysis of at least 2 sites if the Gates sites ends up not working?
So definitely, and we went a little higher on the feasibility study than we thought we were going to at the beginning for that very reason, because at the end of feasibility, we'll have a schematic design for the building as well as the site, but we will have to lock in at that point the cost of the project with MSBA and the total amount they will reimburse. Yeah. So it's in our interest to have the site fully explored, know about any ledge and any water, et cetera. So we definitely have money in there so that if there are issues, and we've gotten questions about, isn't there water on the Gates site? Doran Whittier, this recommendation is a result of the full master planning process, and they're the ones who recommended Gates as being the most feasible. But again, we haven't done schematic design feasibility studies, so it's possible that that could change over time, and we do have money in the design money for multiple sites if need be.
Okay, and then like you said, if there's extra money, let's say Gates works out and there's not, huge issues you have to look into, that money can then be rolled into the next phase of the project. And then can you just speak, because you're asking or planning to use money from your E&D fund, so can you just talk briefly about the status of the E&D fund, how much is in there right now, and what, taking 1.3 million out would mean?
So the balance right now, the certified balance is $4 million, which is about 4.3% of the budget. And we would actually be taking out the 710. Mm-hmm. So that'll leave us at about 3.5%. Okay.
And just for other folks who might not know, there's sort of a 5% cap you can have on your E&D. So that still leaves you in a very good position, and you don't want to necessarily hit that cap. So that sort of leaves you in a recommended place. I think those were the main things I wanted to highlight. But otherwise, thank you. Like I said, I think it's been a very good process. There's been, it seems like 1 million presentations along the way and leading up to December 4th. And I think there's a couple more. So if somebody hasn't seen it, I'd recommend going to it. And otherwise, thanks and good luck on the 4th.
John?
If it's at Gates, will the 2 schools maintain their individual identity?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the whole DNA that we have in the school system now, as Miriam and McCarthy Town are in the same building, in the same campus, but yet they have their own identities also. So that'll be the plan for Gates and Douglas as well.
Can I just add a little bit to that? We had some questions at one of the forums about the operational costs of that. Why couldn't you just run it as a single school? So we'd be talking about 1,000 kids in one school. And really the costs of running a school are driven by the number of kids. So if we did run it by one school, you'd still have to add an assistant principal to cover the number of kids and so on. So operationally, it really, if it were less expensive at all, it would only be a little bit less expensive. And there aren't any elementary schools in Massachusetts that have 1,000 students in them. So 450 to 550 is the target number based on a lot of research through the visioning process. So that's what we're targeting.
Peter Chingson? Peter?
I mean, I don't really have any comments. I am a member of the school building committee along with Dennis and Marie, and I fully support the project.
Ching-Sung, do you have any questions?
No, not really. Katie and Joan asked the 2 questions that I had.
Yeah, I think that this has been a very thorough process, and yeah, I do feel, even though I haven't been exposed to as many presentations as Katie has, because she's the liaison, I do feel as if I've been to a lot of them and watched the process unfold, and I've been very impressed favorably by how thorough it has been. And it's actually very interesting, even though I don't have kids in the schools, and it's rather abstract. But I had a question about the proposed use of E&D. When you talk about 710, do you have to front the full 1.3 and then the reimbursement gives you a net expenditure of 710, or are you actually just, yeah?
So the warrant article will be to approve the expenditure of $1.3 million, so everybody needs to be aware of that. MSBA will reimburse as the expenses come in throughout the process, so they will start reimbursing us as soon as we start spending money. So we will not have to front more than the 710.
I just wanted to make that clear, because people might go to town meeting and say, well, what? It says 1.3. I thought they said it would only cost net. It will, but yeah. And I do have vivid memories of walking through the Douglas School and walking. The basement was just a shock. We were walking on cardboard, covering what must have been a really bad floor, but in ducking under, and even I had to duck under the sewer pipes, and I didn't know that they were sewer pipes. Maybe I would have been more leery of it, but I participate in the Douglas Read Aloud program every year, and so I've gotten to see that side of Douglas School. The things that, and a number of us here, including the town manager, do, but the things that they do, the education that they do there, and the amount of enthusiasm that the teachers just manage to sort of elicit from all those kids is just extraordinary under those conditions. I mean, with the pods that were supposed to be temporary and have ended up being permanent fixtures for whatever generations of students. But so I'm looking forward to seeing the change happen. So anyhow, thank you. Any other comments, questions from the board? If not, audience.
Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I was hoping I could see that enrollment. There was a slide that we went past that had enrollment.
Yep, let me go back to... We'll get a couple of slides in there, Tara, on enrollment.
No, that's okay. That's one right there. So
this one right here?
Yeah, so it looks to me like we're looking at over the next 10 or 20 years, an increase in enrollment by what looks like about 10%, 15%, something like that. Is that what we're talking about?
So I can explain this. So the enrollment projections have changed quite a bit in the last 2 years because the housing sales has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. So yes, we're looking at increasing about 200 students at the elementary level over the next 10 to 12 years. It's not quite 10%, it's probably about 8%.
Yes, and I suspect it'll be more if we don't curb the growth in development. Is that what I'm hearing?
So it's much more sales of existing homes than it is building of new homes. So it's sales of existing homes, and there was quite a decrease in the sales of existing homes from 2008 through 2013, and then it picked up rapidly in 2015, and it increased actually. Sales of existing homes increased 65% between 2015 and 2017.
But we've seen certain properties where one house with an older couple is gone and 15, 16 units put in its place. Are you saying that there are less kids per acre of units developed? Or I don't understand how that could ever be all about existing, or mostly about existing. But we can work that another time. My biggest question is, and I understand the need for Douglas to be replaced. I've been through that. 10 years ago, it needed to be replaced. My concern is that I feel like there's been this grand decision of this primary option that I feel like should have been made at a town meeting vote. But that aside, I feel like that's been done without respect to the carbon footprint because the carbon footprint of concrete and new building materials and all of that can be very dramatic. And I hope that since there is enough money in there to do 2 or 3 different sites, that we actually look at the details for 2 or 3 different options and we bring those forward for people to make decisions. Frankly, I feel like it makes sense to me to spend $50 million on Douglas that we get back and spend only $25 million to replace Douglas, and then maybe 10 years from now do Gates and all that, because I went to school around here, and the Gates fields are pretty sopping wet, and it doesn't show on the flood zone. The 100-year or the 500-year flood zone doesn't show the areas that are flooding now. So I think that we have a big problem here, Houston. We've got to look forward in terms of our policies relative to growth and development, because it does impact, I believe, the enrollment. And I think we need to look at keeping 3 schools for the obvious reasons. If we invest in a twin school that then isn't big enough, then where are we 20 years from now? With the proposed primary option, the kids are going to have to walk across the boardwalk anyway. So we could be doing something creative, like replacing, Gates School, and then Douglas can come into it, and then we replace Douglas. But I feel like there's a more sustainable option. My intuition is telling me, and we're not doing it because we're taking, a preliminary assessment and then taking a preferred option without looking at the details. So I really urge you to revise the proposal to look at least 3 options in detail, and then we'll make decisions afterwards, especially since we're so focused on sustainability over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other audience members, comments, questions? All right. Well, I guess that's it. We're going to be talking about our positions on the articles later in the meeting, but and if there are no other, questions or comments from the board, then you're free to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Janet. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Dennis. Great to see you back on the school committee. All right. Presentation of special town meeting zoning articles. You're on, Ray. And I'm running 15 minutes late. I'm not too bad.
That's actually excellent. And actually, I don't have so much as a presentation as what I did is actually just list the articles. And what I thought would make the most sense is kind of just discuss kind of what was the origin of the article, answer any questions, and have it a little more. So I don't have a formal presentation per se. And I have staff here to help me out. Kristen's going to. Okay, now these, I noticed that the articles have been changed order from the warrant article version that I have, so this is not in the order. This is not the order.
Well, the order will be subject to discussion later, so who knows? Don't worry, it's not over till it's over, okay. So, yeah.
So the first one is the marijuana establishment temporary moratorium. That came from you guys. So the origin of that, we did have a public hearing last week on that one. Unless there's any other questions, I really don't have any more to say about that one.
Well, we'll spare you, because we are pretty familiar with that one.
Okay. More familiar than I, believe
And
me.
we've talked about it at this forum anyway, so.
Okay.
Yeah, before, thanks.
The second one is the Brookside Shops, which again, I think the board is familiar with, because I know recently we've gone through some issues with Trader Joe's. This article is basically, if you know, familiar with the history, it was grandfathered, the grandfathering expires, it's now zoned residential, which is really severely limits what the current property owner can do with the property. And I do want to highlight, if you've noticed in the Beacon the last couple of weeks, there's been articles about the changing nature of retail. So the landscape in terms of what's going on with retail and what you can and can't do, and the nature of what's going into retail centers now is actually changed rather dramatically. This really says we're going to propose to zone it as is being used, which is limited business. There's a history here with the neighbors and the owner that, because this article has come up to town meeting twice before, there is a new owner, as you're aware, who I think has done a very good job of working with the neighbors, working with the Board of Selectmen, working with the Planning Board. So I think they've demonstrated a track record now of kind of listening, and they're more than a caretaker. They really want to develop the center. We work closely with the neighbors, and we thought time was right to bring that forward. So that's been, I think, fairly well vetted. In our last meeting, when we talked about this at the Planning Board, we actually had representations from the neighborhood. And I specifically asked, I said, are you going to get up at town meeting and say you don't want this again? And they were good. The only reservation that Mr. Nolan had was, if there was a change in ownership, we should pull this back. And I quite candidly said, I don't disagree, given the history. So that's, I don't know if there's any questions on that one I can answer for the board.
Katie?
Just quick, what was Mr. Nolan trying to say? If there's a change in ownership before December, if there's a change in ownership after the zoning change?
No, before.
Sure.
If there was there was a history of
Yes.
broken promises, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. Things have gone very, very well.
Right.
I think he's basically saying, if I'm working with these people, I feel good.
Right.
It was if there would be a change in ownership and/or management before the December 4th meeting. Once zoning is in, zoning
Right.
is in.
Exactly. And
Right.
yeah, so I think he just has to know, I mean, they could change ownership, in January or April, hopefully they don't. And I think, especially if.
No, he
the
wasn't
zoning
talking
comes
about, he
through.
was talking about, okay, I know who I'm working with now.
Right.
If those are the same people working with in December, he didn't have an issue.
Okay. And do you
That's-
know, I know you said they're not going to get up and express opposition. Do you know if any are going to get up and express support for this change?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, they may, my guess is they may be passive. I don't think they're going to stand up in opposition,
Okay.
as best as I know right now, but town meeting is its own organism.
Sure. I know that. Yeah, and I just otherwise want to, I think as you mentioned, new owners have been just significantly better about working with us and with the town staff and with the neighbors. So I think it's finally, hopefully, the time for this to succeed. So
Agreed.
fingers crossed.
Okay. The shopping center Parker one, I'm actually going to defer to Kristen. This is purely, in my opinion, a housekeeping definitional change to one of the articles that really dictates the number of parking spaces required for the amount of square footage of the facility. And it includes, I think, restaurants and coffee shops where it doesn't before, because under the current definition would require a whole lot more parking spaces than it would be for a more limited. Again, the nature of retail is changing rather dramatically. If you go to the CVS Center up here at Great Road and Two-Way, for example, the composition there now, you're seeing much more service-oriented businesses. You have a gym in there now. You have a physical therapy office. So you're going to see more of those types of establishments. Those types of establishments typically require fewer parking spaces per square foot of usage. So this really says, okay, we're not going to impose a whole lot more parking spaces on a facility when we know there's going to be more service-oriented type businesses. Do you want to add anything, Kristen, or is that?
I think you captured it pretty well. Essentially, the current definition requires a shopping center to include 2 or more retail stores. So if it does not include 2 or more retail stores, it's not categorized as a shopping center. And so then we would have to take a look at every single use in that plaza and calculate the parking based on those specific uses, whereas in a shopping plaza, it really kind of functions all together because people are going from one store to the next and they're not moving their space unless they've got a large, bag of groceries. But so it really speaks to kind of what we've been seeing in changes in the market. So.
Any questions on that one? Okay. The last one, on the parking facilities in South Ashford Village District, this has generated a firestorm of its own. So I want to be kind of upfront saying that the origination of this came from a property owner in South Acton. And is their right, they said, we want to do parking. Parenthetically, we have an issue as a town with parking in South Acton. Okay. So the article that was presented was this owner wanted to say, I want to be able to do parking, commercial parking facilities by right. That's what our public hearing was on. We heard vociferous pushback from the neighbors saying, don't do this by right, do it by special permit. The board listened and we said, okay, we agree, special permit. I think after the fact, there were a lot of people started thinking about what they thought this may or may not be, and it engendered a lot of concern. This one, I don't have a strong stake in this at all, other than I know at our public hearing, I said, the town has an issue. There is an issue with parking in South Acton. In my opinion, this gave the town a framework to say, okay, at least let's get it up front. It's a special permit process, we could look at it. I think there's concerns on the part of the citizens that that's not good enough. So that, I don't answer any other questions on that, because I know after the fact, there were some questions on some citizens that they thought there was a process issue, which I believe there was not. I know we heard from the Historic District Commission, we got a letter from one of the attendants about the minutes, saying, did the minutes reflect what was going on? We addressed those at our last meeting. So my guess at town meeting, if you went forward with this, it's going to generate a lot of pushback. I think beyond what it was intended to be. So questions to discuss this one. As I told Jan and I talked about this. If the BOS recommends not to do this, I'm saying pull it, because I will not stand up at town meeting and present this.
Yeah, no, Ray and I did spend some time talking about this because I wanted to share with him just the perspective that I had of the board based on our last discussion, which was not very keen on this. I was keeping my mind open until I had a chance to talk with you. And then I also conferred with Kristen, and based on everything I've gotten, I think, with all due respect to the planning board, I don't think it's a well-advised proposal for a number of reasons. So,
I agree.
But I will let my colleagues, Peter has his hand up, I think he'll add his thoughts on this too. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I was involved with the train station, the new train station from the beginning. I've been dealing on behalf of the town with the property owner in South Acton. He was told he couldn't put a parking facility that would violate zoning. He went ahead and did it anyway. The town then enforced the zoning bylaw, and his alternative was to come to the planning board and ask for a change in zoning to allow him to have this parking lot. Both SATSAC and the Historic District Commission have expressed strong opposition to this. We did get an opinion from town council that if one individual in town requests that the zoning bylaw go forward, that the selectmen have a legal obligation to do that. I respectfully disagree with town council on that opinion, and there are no cases on it. As he pointed out, he was simply his interpretation of the statute. I think it would be a very serious mistake for this board to set a precedent that we will, on the petition of one individual, be required to put an article before town meeting. And I don't want to set that precedent. And so I would recommend that the selectmen vote not to bring this forward to town meeting for all those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Was council's recommendation the recommendation of one person, or was it that a planning board recommendation of an article was to be given some respect or weight? Mr. Manager, maybe you can clarify.
I think generally council was talking about when planning board has a positive recommendation, generally it goes on the warrant. I mean, as Peter said, there's no case law. I wouldn't view what council sent us as a really strong opinion on it. And as Peter said, there's no case law.
So it's really, but it's really that this is an article that's been recommended by the planning board. It's not that it's one individual can sort of,
right.
if you honor one individual's request, because obviously.
You could do citizen petition.
Yeah, that would have to be a citizen's petition. All right, okay. Other comments, questions? Katie?
Yeah, I struggle with the parking every morning to get to the train, but that aside, I don't think that this is the solution to that. I think everybody sort of agrees that this isn't the solution to that. And it needs a lot more study, and I think I've heard you say, Ray, that if the board votes to not recommend this, that you don't want to get up and
let me clarify. I think, first of all, I agree with what Peter said. I don't think we should, the impetus came from an individual, okay? What came out in our hearing was there is an issue. There was an acknowledgement by anybody who stood up in the terms of the abutters that there's an issue. and that there are potential areas in South Acton that could benefit from doing commercial parking. So I just want to kind of put that in context. I think the issue of study is not the issue. Okay, I think we can study this thing to death. I think the way the board looked at this was, what should the process be? Let me emphasize what should the process be. What was presented was do it by right, and we said no, for all the obvious reasons. By special permit allows us to address all the issues ad nauseum, to study them at the time when the particular application came up. Having said that, I think there are other issues here beyond this that I would say tell me I don't want to touch it. So from my perspective, the board kind of really said, okay, this is by right what was presented and what we heard. What we heard from all the abutters was, don't do it by right. We urge you to do this by special permit. That's what we heard, and that's what we did. Afterwards, people thought about it and started getting more concerned about it, were concerned that it was an individual, et cetera. I consider those to be somewhat tangential to the issue of process. So the issue of more study is, I strongly believe, is not, we could study it to death. The question is, okay, if I'm a landowner, what's the process of addressing it? We can keep zoning the way it is and don't even bring this up and say, zoning is zoning, I think is to Peter's point. So I think the further study is not the issue. I just want to be very clear on that. I think whether someone can bring something forth and ask, and how they ask for it is what we were considering.
Okay, well, I'm going to say I think that further study is part of the issue. I do think you need to look at this zoning proposal much more carefully. You need to get a lot more input. You need to think about this more. And then I think the way it's coming forward right now and the way that zoning change or proposal right now is not ready, and I don't think it is appropriate. So I do think that there's a process issue there, and I think that there's an issue with the process in the zoning article and the process of how we got here. So I disagree with you a little on that, Ray, but that's fine. And so I do recommend that we pull this. I also agree with a lot of what Peter said, and we have a process for individuals getting warrant articles or getting articles on our warrant, and that's the Citizen Petition method. And so if there is an owner that wants to do this, and there are at least 2 owners that are doing this right now, they need to go through that process. Frankly, in the meantime, we need to enforce our current zoning, which doesn't allow this. So I think we do, it will, it doesn't solve our problem, and you're right, there is a problem. Like I said, I deal with the parking there, and it's a mystery about every day when I pull up to the fire station on School Street. About some mornings it's fine, and some mornings it appears everybody's driven in to the train station. I can't get a spot. So, but there are alternatives. The new lot that's hopefully going to be for what's the word I'm looking? Carpools, thank you. I kept just coming with the word commuter. Carpools will hopefully be opening soon. We have our shuttle, we have other options as well, and a lot to look into. But in the meantime, I don't think this is ready, and hopefully the board pulls it tonight.
Jing-Sung, Joan.
I'm basically inclined to agree with what everyone else has said. I think it's correct to pull this, so would like to do that.
Joan? Nothing? Okay. Yeah, after I talked with Ray and I talked with Kristen, I mean, I just thought, well, there's something really wrong with this proposal, and it's that it's one person, and it's to legitimize one person's activity, which currently is in violation of the existing zoning bylaws. And while I understand that, I just think that it's not a good way to plan. You have to look forward, and there are a lot of other things that the zoning bylaw provides. There are a lot of things going on that are in process, and having one person be able to just sort of decide that there's going to be this parking lot, which frankly is going to be a Band-Aid. It's not going to solve the parking problem at all. It's only going to create more of a sort of haphazard bunch of whatever, parking lots probably in South Acton, and probably undermine other plans that are in place or that are moving forward that sort of are aiming to decrease the reliance on cars, if it's possible, or at least have just shuttles and whatever. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I happen to agree that if you're talking about process, part of the process for planning is to study. There's a big picture that has to be considered, includes the whole parking problem. Everybody acknowledges that there is a problem, but just allowing people willy-nilly to apply for permits to create parking lots in places where they may not belong, people may not want them, and where at the end of the day they don't really solve the problem is not a good way to proceed. So I would agree that if people are comfortable with voting to pull it from the warrant, that we pull it. So
Yeah, I do want to, I concur with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I do want to emphasize, that's why the planning board said make this special permit, for that very reason. If we allowed it by right the way it was originally written, all the comments are valid. But a special permit says, you can ask, but that's it. That's different than legitimizing someone who did something wrong. So even in this particular case, what could very well have happened if we went forward with this, he would still have to do a special permit and he could still be turned down. So if we did it by right, that's a different issue. So I just want to emphasize, I think we're in sync. And the board, that's where the board was on this, was okay, we're not going to allow this willy-nilly. It has to be a special permit process. Having said that, I strongly urge the board to pull it. Because given even this discussion, and that we need, a 2/3 or 75%, I can't remember. 2/3, it's not worth the time and the effort of this board or the planning board to take the town meeting.
And we'll spare you the agony of having percent anyhow. Thank you. Any other comments, questions from the board? All right, audience.
Hi, I'm David Martin. I live on High Street, and I'm also chair of SATSAC. I agree with the chair. The planning board meeting in question started out, and it was the article was written by right, and it got changed to by special permit. That's all fine, but by right doesn't need any criteria. By special permit needs criteria. Right. By what criteria are future planning boards to judge the special permit? There is no language in this proposed article to do that. There was no research done on it, and as far as I can tell, it went from proposal to being irrevocably on the in the warrant in a matter of an hour. Who ever heard of a zoning article only being reviewed for an hour? I got up in the meeting after it became, the planning board approved by, they closed the hearing, they had the vote for by special permit, all fine. I got up to ask in this meeting how were they going to judge the special permit. I was told I could no longer speak because the hearing was closed. Having a single meeting that takes the amount of an hour is not good process. I think the planning department and planning board, you could tell me what a zoning article you've only had on the floor for an hour. No other one, just this one, right? Typically, zoning articles go through lots of study and research and figuring out what the language is going to be. This was not like that. There is a process problem. Thank you.
I totally understand that Tara Fredericks.
And you are?
I am Tara. Hear me roar. So I totally understand David's perspective, because as a person coming from the general public, I don't even know that you knew about it until I told David, until you guys knew about it, right?
I saw it a couple days before.
Okay, so from the general public, if you don't go to a lot of these meetings, you don't see the development of things happening. And so I urge people to look at the beacon, look for zoning articles, and look online. The information is there. It's open. I was there at the meeting before, in defense of Ray. I was there when they first looked at the thing, and anybody could have been at that meeting. Anybody could have looked at the links to see that there was a zoning article being proposed. Anybody could have looked at the beacon and seen that the zoning article was being proposed for a November 7th hearing. Is that correct? So the process, I do agree that there are process issues, and I think that we have the option to do more outreach, and we have the option that when an article comes up for zoning that impacts all of South Acton Village, that maybe you tell David and David. These guys are on the committees, and they have all these folks that meet regularly to talk about what to do about what South Acton. And so I think that that's a process we can engage in voluntarily just to be more inclusive in our process. That's one thing. The second thing is that Roland fought for the idea to not have SPP on this. When I was out there and I said, wait a second, you guys, that you can't just have that by right. That will level South Acton and all this. And I said you could at least have it for the special permit. And Roland convinced the board that we don't need special permit. She's just one person. That's what he said. And so that I object to that. I think that I was bringing forward legitimate concerns at the not hearing, but the original thing that talked about doing the hearing. At that time, Roland never mentioned that Gordon Richards had the option to lease the property to the town, and the town could do municipal parking. I thought that's a brilliant solution. The municipal parking is already allowed under zoning, and he could lease that any time, and Roland didn't tell us that. So I would like, going forward, any articles that are proposed for zoning to be submitted to the groups that have the closest that are in closest touch with the residents that live around those areas. And then I was going to say, okay, so if one person can bring forward an article, then that's very different than what I was told when in 2001, I believe it was, I brought forward a proposal under Citizen's Petition to take wetlands out of the equation for deciding how many houses could be allowed on a particular piece of property. I had to jump through a lot of hoops, hundreds of hours of work to get that citizen petition to town meeting. And so if it's true that one person can bring something, I'll tell you, I have some grounds for a complaint about what I had to go through when I was told that no, one person couldn't bring an article forward. So I would have brought, perhaps this year, the tree preservation bylaw that Concord put forward. If we had that in place, we would have saved thousands of trees just on that one self-service place. When you go through there and see that clear cut, that's the result of one project. So all of these projects that you're seeing moving forward until we get the tree preservation bylaw to propose could have been done earlier this year when I had walked into town hall and asked for a tree preservation bylaw like Concord's. Anyway, thank you. So thank you very much to the board for it looks like you're probably going to pull this, and I really appreciate that. I think that these guys were put in an awkward position relative to a process that I think can be much more inclusive, and I think we have the opportunity to fix that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kara. Yeah, I don't think one person can move forward an article, and I think your experience with Citizens Petition it's a lot of work. It is. Kristen, did you have something you wanted to add about?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify kind of the
about
process.
Yeah.
Two pieces. So if in this particular case, at the meeting before the public hearing, at the planning board meeting that preceded, I think it was about a month before the public hearing, Mr. Gordon Richards approached the board asking if they would consider it for the public hearing. And I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of the board, but from what I understand at that meeting, there seemed to be some citizen interest in having it move forward. And so the board decided that they would shepherd it forward to the public hearing at least. And to hear it at that point, they could have said, no, we're not interested in considering this. You need to do a citizen's petition. The other piece I was just going to clarify, I think the intention of the planning department in not having the article move forward with a special permit to the public hearing was because that's how it was originally requested, and that more people would probably come out to voice either their concerns or get more people interested in being at the public hearing if it were listed as by right as it was originally proposed by the property owner rather than the special permit. So that was the rational reason behind that comment.
Thank you, Kristen. Yes.
David Hahn, 105 School Street, and I'll just speak on behalf of the HDC, although my personal views are pretty much in line. You got the memo from the HDC about all the reasons why we think this should be pulled, and I appreciate it if the selectmen did pull this article. Since this is the hot topic right now, I would urge the selectmen to encourage Selby to pursue some planning funds, either through MBTA or Metropolitan Area Planning Council, to do essentially a train station parking traffic analysis that would take the whole town into consideration so that we can hopefully solve this thing, because we have different committees working on different pieces. We got Vans over here, we got SATSEC over there, we got HDC over here, and somehow it all has to come together because we know it's a problem. So I think this is a good opportunity for the selectmen to, help Selby out perhaps to go find some money and let's do some analysis, because this is all about spaces and parking, and you can simulate, I know Ray doesn't agree to doing a lot of studies, but this is something you can simulate pretty well with computers. You can figure out how many spaces can you put in South Acton Village before the roads don't work anymore? Could you ever put a deck on the main lot? There's only one way in and out, and at some point, those intersections aren't gonna work anymore. So, and at some point, you're gonna have too many spaces where you may have the space, but it'll take you 10 minutes longer in the morning and 10 minutes longer at night just to get to it or out of it. And what good does that do? So to me, this is all quantifiable. You can set up scenarios and test them out, but I think it's got to be a town-wide thing, and I would urge the selectmen to urge Selby to go find some money and let's solve this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Danny Factor, 11 Davis Road. So actually, since there haven't been separate comment periods between the different articles, I actually have a question about the shopping center parking, if that's all right. And it has to do with the issue of safety and our parking lots, our shopping center parking lots getting more crowded with pedestrians. I'm sure you're well aware that we've had 2 fatalities in our region, one in the Acton Trader Joe's parking lot, and the other, an Acton person in a shopping center parking lot in Westford. And, you know, there may be a phenomenon where our parking lots are getting more crowded with pedestrians. I myself sit on the Commission on Disabilities, and there's an increasing concern about when people with disabilities are in areas in proximity to vehicles. And I'm not necessarily asking that this article address that, but I would be interested, you know, if it doesn't, whether this is something that has come up with the planning board, and in particular with this article, would you say that it is enhancing safety, you know, or at least neutral on the matter? Thank you.
First, let me answer your, it has not come before the planning board at this point. I'm well aware of the 2 situations. As best I know, this is neutral, if not beneficial, but I'll let Kristen address that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's neutral. Essentially, it's really just talking about the uses that are at the plazas and the number of parking spaces that are calculated for those uses. So it doesn't do anything in terms of site layout. It's just purely about what is categorized as a parking or as a shopping plaza. That's it.
Thank you.
Robert Boren, West Acton. I've got a question, if I might, first. Are all of these being addressed simultaneously at this present time? All of these various issues, including...
Yeah, they're all proposed articles on our draft special town meeting warrant for December 4th.
But the marijuana establishment temporary moratorium, is that
we did that quickly because this board is responsible for putting the article on the warrant, so...
Has it already gone by during this meeting? Or
we didn't really have a full discussion about it. It's just because we've had discussion about, and this is planning board presenting articles, and we actually are more familiar with the article that planning board is supposed to present because it's technically a zoning amendment proposal. And so I just thought that it wasn't necessary for Mr. Yacobi to present it because he's presenting to the board that is responsible for putting the article on the warrant. I mean, is there something that you wanted to ask about that article?
I have something to say about that article if there's public comment to be received. Is this the time or is it later?
No, you can make comments since we're talking about all of them, even though there was no presentation.
Very good, thank you. I will address Article 5. I'm not familiar with the language you folks all know about articles and all the various terms that I've heard thrown about. I'm just too ignorant about that. But I was informed that the HDC was not included by this individual, whoever that is, that brought it forward for the parking lot, and either was the South Acton Train Advisory Committee. And I wrote a paragraph when I arrived here, and I'm not going to bother reading it because I don't think it's going to add anything to the argument, but I was of the understanding that the way it was brought forward by said individual to bypass procedures that the town already has in place just seemed that it was surreptitious and underhanded, and I take great exception to that in any situation when government agencies are involved, because deceit is just not the way to run things. And that's how I saw it, that's still my opinion of it, and I take great umbrage against it, quite frankly. Relative to the top one, Article 6, I do have something I'm going to read, and it's just going to be verbatim. I penned it while I was here. It may not quite suit the tone of what you typically hear, but nevertheless, I'm just going to read it as I wrote it down. Respective of notions that I've heard propounded relative to this article, I have this to say. A gateway drug, which some people regard marijuana to be, I think that's a ludicrous notion. I just read it as I wrote it. Gateway drug is erroneous, pathetic, and is both a product of media propaganda and a human timidity to cover beneath the unreliable auspices of supposed leaders, officials, and government prejudice against drugs, and in this instance, an organic element incident to the planet, which prior to governing agency was not illegal nor thereby, quote unquote, threatening. I believe vehemently that these elements, which the undiscerning populace latches onto, are the debasement of human well-being and foundational civil rights. Moreover, drugs are accessible to every child in this town, which people may not want to believe, but I'm rather of the opinion if a child wants to get drugs at the high school, he can do it without having to go through a store. Underground markets and stiff-arm tactics to postpone these establishments, e.g. the stores, e.g. cultivation of the plants in town is, to me, substantively unwarranted. I further wrote down, ignorance about drugs is not the purview of the inexperienced to propagate the rhetoric promulgated by less than fear the intention of others to infringe upon the liberties of human beings. I vote adamantly against Article 6 and state authoritatively that I, personally, am acquainted not only with cannabis but harder drugs, which even my own children have been influenced by. And respective of my children, one of them was actually doing heroin at one point in time, had a boyfriend that died from it. But that doesn't actually bear upon marijuana because they aren't correlated. Even though people might want to believe that they are, it's just it's a deceitful lie that's propagated by any number of agencies that don't actually qualify as having the authority to do so. Nothing withheld my very own children from liberating themselves from their relationships to these drugs, and all, capitalized all, attestations of fear about marijuana specifically are suspect of being unintelligent and lacking or wholly devoid of knowledge respecting cannabis, and are simply repetitions of fear and the preponderance of contemporaneous arrogance to misdirect and control humans away from liberty into corrals by which they then can be controlled. And pretty much the kind of synopsis of this, essentially the thesis, ignorance should not be permitted to sway public policy. Yet by virtue of evidences in, quote, policy, currently this is horrendously the case. There's argument that the stores will be postponed because you're waiting for state legislation to come through to thereby give you guidelines about what to do with the stores and or cultivation and so forth. But for as much as a moratorium is probably going to go forward, despite my opinion, it just seems absurd to me that people are afraid of a drug that really is terribly innocuous in and of its own self. It was incident to the planet long before we even lived here or came along. It was incident to the planet and human consumption before laws were put against it. And it doesn't actually propagate the harm that people in fear and in ignorance want to say that it does, and most of them don't know who are against it, but are simply reiterating rhetoric that comes, as I said, from the government and from the people who are, say, right-wing Christians or whatever, kind of mindset keeps you in a locked frame set, thinking that you're afraid of this because you don't know what it can do. Well, I'm here to tell you, having used any number of drugs, that they don't do what people think they do. And the article should not be put forward.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience, questions about any of these proposed articles?
Yes, I don't think that the marijuana establishment temporary moratorium should go forward either. I stated my positions in earlier meetings. I just feel like it's not dangerous, and these kids can get it anyway, and I feel like getting it from a government store is probably the safest way for them to get it than to get it on the street. But there's going to be plenty of organic, locally grown supplies available all around, and what we're trying to do, or what this thing seems to be doing, is preventing people from getting it local from our local farmers, and I think it's really sad. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I think that we are done talking about the zoning articles, and you folks are free to go as well. Thank you very much for all of your help in enlightening us. So we still have, all right. Now on to presentation about citizen petition article about recreational marijuana.
Hi, good evening. My name is Chetan Vidhate. I live in Patriot Hill neighborhood. I'm also a member of Acton Cares group, which stands for Acton Community Against Recreational Marijuana. I would like to thank Chairwoman Janet Adachi and Honorable Member of this Board of Selectmen for this opportunity to present tonight. We are here to ask you your support of our citizens petition to put a ballot question on March 28, 2018 local election. Our group collected 2 times the 100 required signatures in 2 days by the stated deadline. The passage of this ballot question by the voter should lead to bylaw changes for banning non-medical marijuana establishment within the town of Acton. As we have been saying since we first approached you in September, there is a difference between commercialization and legalization. There is a difference between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. Marijuana is legal in Massachusetts. Commercialization means increased access. This sends a strong message to our youth, schools, community, and the wider geographical area that Acton has normalized and is promoting the use of drug. Yet, is recreational marijuana really harmful, or is it safe? You don't need to look far to find many studies to show it is very harmful. Right on the front page of the National Institute of Health website, the National Institute on Drug Abuse states clearly marijuana exposure can cause long-term and possibly permanent adverse changes in the brain. Can Acton say that it is safe and that we do not have a drug and alcohol problem already in our school and town? Look, we are in an opioid epidemic already. Do we need another problem, or can we afford another one? The pro-marijuana industry will promote marijuana regardless of its harmfulness. For our community, we have to carefully look at the industry and the product. Commercialization detracts from our community values, character that is built by cautious and sincere efforts by the community over many years. Revenues will not likely pay for the negative outcomes in traffic, fire hazard, public safety, public health, property values, and schools. For example, in the town of Amherst, marijuana is expected to have negative impact because of the additional law enforcement and EMTs anticipated. Per USA Today, it also fuels the black market to thrive. Massachusetts has the advantage for looking at other states that have gone before us with regard to commercialization of recreational marijuana. You may have to read some headlines on the expected revenue the marijuana industry claims it brings to states and towns. Kevin Balmer, the Colorado Municipal League's deputy director, points out, a town can't just look at the revenues from the marijuana, it must also consider the possibility of additional expenditure. Each town must also ask itself whether the windfall is worth the potential for increased burden on the social services. Please be reminded that some data coming out of these states are spun by the pro-marijuana industry. The headlines will not mention the social cost to the support the negative impact of the industry on the communities. The social cost is what taxpayer have to pay above the revenue to mitigate the unforeseen and undesired outcomes of this recreational marijuana. If you would like to see the data supporting all these negative outcomes I have just mentioned, I will be happy to provide to you or present it before the in the special town meeting on December 2nd in front of moderator, and also in the December 4th special town meeting. As our town leaders, please consider our petition. This is a decision that will touch our culture permanently and will affect the town of Acton for decades to come. With the uncertainty of regulations and certainty that neighboring towns have already instituted a ban, Acton Cares would like to request to reserve the rights to update the language of the ballot question. We also request that please consider to put this question earlier in the special town meeting because we anticipate many parents and senior citizens coming for the town meeting, so it will be very convenient for them to have it early. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you for the consideration and time.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Anybody?
So I guess I know that we often don't take positions on citizens' petitions. Whether or not the board wants to do that, I am not really going to speak to that. I do think that, at least personally, I will be voting against this citizens petition, mostly because the premise is that, well, for a number of reasons. One, I don't actually think I agree with the statement before that marijuana is not actually dangerous. But even the argument presented by the citizens group that commercialization and legalization are two different things is, I think, a ridiculous argument at its core. What you're talking about is legalization of a commodity. And as far as the history of this country and many others is concerned, legal commodities tend to be commercialized if there's money to be made in selling them. And so therefore, I don't think that legalization and commercialization are two different things. In fact, I think they are one and the same. A legal commodity is going to be commercialized as long as there's money to be made in selling it, which in most commodities and services there is. And so I don't really see how this is not relitigating or taking a second look at the ballot question that was voted last year. I don't buy that argument, but at the end of the day, I think that having voters vote on it is fine, and I think it's good to have people vote on issues they care about. So I'm happy to have it on town meeting, but I will definitely be voting against it.
Anybody else? Peter?
Yeah, my question would be, are we going to revisit this issue when we decide whether to recommend or not recommend this article, or?
Yeah, I think we're going to have some discussion when we're voting on the next item on our agenda, so, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll reserve my comments until that discussion.
Okay. It looks like you've got somebody in the audience who wants to make a comment.
So it's my understanding, Tara Fredericks, West Acton, it's my understanding that the recommendations on the articles are relative to this would be about the moratorium, whereas he's asking for the ban to go to a ballot.
We recommend or not recommend citizens petitions, and so we will vote on that as well.
But I'm sorry, so being the non-binding resolution.
It's a
to bring it to
non-binding
ballot.
resolution.
Got it, okay.
It's a non-binding.
So I have a basic question. To get to the ballot, how many signatures are required?
It's a selectman's decision.
So nobody can just go to the ballot?
That's why this is a non-binding resolution.
Oh, I see. So to his point, that this taxes from pot wouldn't pay for the negative impacts, if there were any. Let's look at the negative impacts of development, perhaps in the houses that people here live in. I'm not sure that any of those new tax revenues paid for the costs that were incurred. I looked at the long-term impact of growth and the impact to the people who lived here before the growth, and we pay a substantial increase to support including people to come here. And so I object to the idea of having something that people want clearly by ballot, that was indicated, to say that there is negative impacts that aren't going to get paid for. I also would like to say that the gateway, I think, to heavy drug use is poverty and the lack of social services and the lack of things to do locally and to connection with people. And so we have a lot of work to do in that regard that's not going to take care of by making something more illegal. If I would like to have a ballot question, I'd like to have a ballot question on a moratorium on growth that isn't a public necessity. So I'm hoping to find out the process for getting a question to the ballot. Is it to do a non-binding resolution, or can I just bring something to an agenda in January, perhaps?
You're asking?
I am, because there's
I think that you have to persuade the selectmen if you want the selectmen to put something on the ballot. And the idea behind the non-binding resolution is that if there's strong public support for the resolution, that perhaps the political animal in the selectmen will be inclined to respond and put something on the ballot. The fact is that the selectmen, when we talked about it earlier, weren't inclined to move forward with a ballot question.
Okay, thank you.
So anyhow, but if you want to do that.
No, I just wanted to have, I was stunned by the idea that one person could walk into town hall and get a zoning article, and the town attorney supported that idea.
Now,
I was going to say, how far can we go?
Don't take it out of context. I mean, now you're going to put that, there's going to be that false fact that makes the headlines. Oh, one person can get zoning done in Acton, and no, that's not the way it works anyhow. It was because the planning board had voted to recommend, so anyhow, with some support from some other people and also some protests, so yes.
Hi, I'm David Martin, High Street. So I object to this referendum. The town already voted in the majority in the statewide ballot question in favor of recreational marijuana. I don't see any reason now why we would go back and revisit that issue. I don't understand why, since the town supported that issue, why we now would object to having a dispensary in town, since a majority of the people in town again voted for this. I disagree with the so-called facts. For the gentleman said earlier, there's no evidence that marijuana is a gateway drug. It is probably less dangerous than alcohol. And I think there's more harm comes from banning a substance like this than not banning it, right? You only have to go back and look at prohibition. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Angie So, I live in Bellows Farm. So I'm requesting the board to support the citizen petition. And the reason is because the legalization of marijuana is different from bringing to town, because there is a traffic impact after you bring the store in town. The surrounding town has all either put a moratorium or ban. If you look at all the surrounding towns, Stowe, Sudbury, Concord, Carlisle, and Westford, all the surrounding towns have already instituted a moratorium or ban. And there is study shows that most of the traffic that attracted to the on regular basis to the town, 80% are addictive to the drugs. On the bright side, there is on the headlines, you can always see how much revenue it can bring to the town. But in the reality, for example, for town of Amherst, it actually has a negative impact with the increased law enforcement and as well as emergency vehicles. For the law enforcement, for the Bible, the fire code has to be updated in 2018 because of the fire hazard that it has been bringing to by the marijuana business. Also, I want to talk about the reality of the real impact on the use, whether the use will be able to access to or not, whether there is impact to the use, whether we want to increase the accessibility to the ABE school students, the students there. And there are so many studies that have shows that there is, because the brain is still developed until the age 26, they won't stop. And if with the early access to the drug, there has a permanent impact to the brain development. And there is study shows with the proof of that. And I was actually planning to do this presentation later in the December 2nd and the 4th meeting. I don't know if you want me to go through all the details or you want me to postpone that to that meeting.
I think, I thought that the presentation we heard from just earlier was the presentation. We typically don't have more than one presentation on a given article. And if his presentation, I took that to be the presentation. We're not going to have two presentations. You've already he's laid out the basics of the position, I assume, which represents the Acton Cares position on the article. And I think that what he said is very similar to what you said at I think it was the Finance Committee meeting about the article. Very similar assertions regarding the impact on youth, the concern on traffic and law enforcement burdens, and so I don't really see that there's a need for you to reiterate the same arguments that we just heard from your peer, your colleague. Yeah, the way it works is usually when we want somebody to present on an article, we have one presentation. Okay, we don't have two people making two different presentations. Okay. And I don't know if you didn't coordinate who was going to be doing the official presentation, but we're now after 9 o'clock, and it's really, I don't think it would be a productive use of time. A number of us, we're obviously all going to be at town meeting, so we'll hear your presentation at that time, and a number of us will be at the pre-town meeting as well. Although people don't usually do presentations at the pre-town meeting, the moderator goes through the slide deck and kind of advises, you need to keep it short, how much time do you need, that sort of thing. So, yeah, in case you were wondering, there's generally no presentation at the pre-town meeting. The real presentation is going to be at the special town meeting on the 4th.
So let me make the last point, which is the financial. because the income that for the marijuana store is 3% plus the host, the 3% on the host. And if you do take a look at the revenue of the per store based on per store, you're looking at about 50,000 income for the town. But if you look at the financial, the increase, the social impact was the additional law enforcement and also the medical vehicles that's required, and also the other impact financial. So you're looking at a negative impact for the town of Acton, as well as the social impact for the community. So I urge the Board of Selectmen to support the citizen petition. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just want to mention that if you're going to do a presentation at town meeting, you may already have done this or know this, but you need to be in touch with the moderator, the town moderator. He's got a deadline.
Peter, they've already been in touch. They've been in touch with the moderator even before he announced his pre-town meeting, and I forwarded the notice that we got about the pre-town meeting to the people who are, so, yeah, they're aware of it, yeah. Yes.
Robert Bourne, once again. I principally have comments to what has been already stated by the people that just preceded me. I wrote down here, do not have the right to oppose our liberties. And that will harken back to the fact that it was already voted in by the state. So I'm rather befuddled and frankly a little bit vehement, matter of fact, even more than that, how it can be presumed that what was already written in by law, citizens of the state can then be overturned by a town or a select, few people from a town to actually change what was voted in. It's as if you wanted to reverse the presidency. You just don't get to do it because once it's voted down, it happens, and you just can't simply overturn it because you've got fears. Increased accessibility is unscientifically purported. What is the difference, I would like to ask any of these people who have this argument, between commercialization and recreational marijuana? Studies were cited by the individual that preceded me, the man in the white sweater, I believe. Studies cited, funded by whom? And that is a very actually important question to ask whenever a study is purported and statistics are promulgated, because there's always money behind a study, and that money is typically funded by people that have an opinion, and the study leans in the direction of the opinion of the people that gave the money to put the study forward anyway. And if you don't believe that, you've got your head in the sand. Is opposition to cannabis propagated by any person with direct experience, or is it only promulgated by persons who have read privately funded and ostensibly authoritative treatises about cannabis, which again fall under the suspicion of who actually funded it and what was the intended outcome of the study, because that'll generally derive what they're going to conclude. What factually are the promulgated unforeseen consequences, if I didn't already say that? This, to me, seems to be nothing but fearful rhetoric. Here again, I'm going to somewhat reiterate this because it's the point I wrote down. The law was passed by the state. How is it then legally permissible for a singular entity of a town to then override what had been by the citizens of the state rendered legal? And what was the point of the woman just ahead of me? She made some mention about revenues that are going to be negative impact or negative revenues. And I don't have any statistics or any even financial information to offer you, but revenue is already being exchanged. You can bet your bottom dollar that children are getting money at the high school, and maybe not even at the high school, maybe at lower grades, have cash in hand or giving it to someone who's selling marijuana. And the fact that it's being done privately actually would seem to deprive Acton of revenue that it would otherwise get if a store was actually brought into place. I'm flabbergasted that people in this day and age are, quite frankly, just this myopic about an issue that is, I guess I don't have words for it. I'm just astounded.
I just wanted to add a comment when you're asking about how a local municipality can
Please,
go in
yes.
reverse. There's a provision in the law. The law was rewritten after the ballot vote passed in November, and it was the legislature took it and rewrote it. I'm not sure about the details, but the law was signed into effect by Governor Baker in August, and there is a provision in the law that addresses the authority of local governments to just restrict
Certainly.
recreational marijuana. So, and in a town like Acton that voted for the legalization and all the rest of it in November, it's a two-step process. In towns that voted against the proposal in November, they just go to town meeting or whatever their local legislative process is.
Yes.
But in our town, we have to do a local ballot vote, and then there would be a town meeting vote. So.
Yeah.
So there is basis. It's provided in the state law itself. I have nothing else to say about the rest of it, the revenue stuff and
Yes,
all
yes.
that. So, yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
I would super add to your comment relative to the fact that Governor Baker then rewrote the law that we, voted in. Even that seemed to be inappropriate because the citizens had made their statement and then the governor decided, well, I'm going to override your statement and append it. I beg your pardon, Paul. To append what the citizens decided. And thirdly, relative to the fact that no towns around here actually have it legal, Harvard does. Concord may not, I don't know about Boxborough or the other towns nearby, but Harvard hasn't opposed it at all and it's going forward. And people are cultivating it and there will be stores in Harvard. So the notion that it's not happening in the surrounding towns is erroneous and illusory.
And Littleton is legalizing. They're making a pile of money from cultivation of it. So anyhow.
Hi,
Yes,
Margaret
hi.
Bussey from Washington Drive. I guess the thing that I would want to emphasize for this is just that using the democratic process to me with this issue seems really important. And understanding that, I know that the town already voted for this a year ago, but I think that in a lot of people's minds, I totally get your point, Shin-Sung, about sort of legalization and not necessarily being different than commercialization, but I think in a lot of people's minds that I've talked to that it is different. So when they were voting for legalization, I literally just had a conversation with a friend last night about it. She said when she was voting for legalization, she just wanted to make sure that people weren't going to prison for smoking pot and that it would be fine to have a few plants. She was not envisioning the effect of legalization, meaning that there would be potential shops in town that would be, fairly accessible to folks and selling all sorts of marijuana products. And so I think that for me, I voted against it because I understood that. I understood that when you legalize that it's going to be commercialized. But I think a lot of people weren't there, and I think we're mostly just trying to say, look, we don't want people to go to prison for possessing marijuana, and that was their motivation. And so I think that in this case, allowing Acton to vote on it and not being the obstacles to sort of not allow Acton to vote on it is a wise decision because it is such a, regardless of how you feel about it personally, it's such a big issue for the town to take on. It's one thing, I think, for people to vote for something kind of in the abstract, and it's another thing for people to sort of say, wow, do we want this in our town right around the corner? I think that is something, and some people might call that, well, that's just NIMBYism, and it is NIMBYism. But I think the NIMBYism is okay in this regard, because people want to be able to determine the destiny of their town. And so if I were in your position, I would, regardless of how I felt about the actual issue of legalization and allowing pot shops to come, I would want the town to have a super robust debate about this, have it on the ballot, so that whatever the outcome, nobody's looking at you saying you were an impediment to this. You guys allowed this to go forward, 10 years down the road or whatever. That we had a robust debate about this specific issue in town when we knew what the specifics were versus something that was a little bit more vague a year ago when there was sort of a sense of, we don't want people to go to prison for possessing marijuana and, that sort of thing. So that would be my argument in supporting this citizen's petition, so that you're not the impediment to a democratic process on an important issue that people feel strongly one way or the other. So anyway, that's my comment. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was trying to repeat back what Janet was saying, that I think it was the legislature that rewrote the law and not Governor Baker, but Baker signed it. Anyway.
The governor can't write laws, that's the legislature still does that, but yeah, thank you, Margaret. I would mention that the vote in Acton was 51% for, and it was about 48% against, and a bunch of people who didn't bother voting. I actually voted against it, and not because I'm opposed to marijuana, it's because I didn't like the draft law. I didn't know who had drafted it. I didn't know, there were a lot of holes in any legislation, and I just wasn't comfortable voting to support a draft law that whose origin I didn't really understand. I'm more comfortable with the law that the legislature has written, even though some people think that that's sort of going against the will of the people, but the legislature represents the people, and they're in the business of drafting laws, and because it's an art and a science. So in any event, but I'm going to stay out of this with my opinions about marijuana. So yes.
Okay, I'm Eddie from Acton Park, and I totally agree what Margaret just said. And the one pro-marijuana argument I heard most, it's legalized. People in this state already voted. Actually, I talked to a lot of friends because I'm passionate about this issue. I talked to a lot of friends who ever voted against legalization or vote yes to legalization. Especially people vote yes for legalization. Most of them said they voted from a good heart. They don't want to criminalize people use marijuana. This is, really from the good heart, sympathize the people need marijuana and want to use it, but never envision the store will come to the town and also become eventually, since as a society want to promote this. And there's a lot of things are legal. Legal or not legal, this is the bottom standard to a human being to behave in the society. It's not something, say it's legal, we should promote it. It's like a casino, it's also legal. Do we want it in Acton? I know years ago, there's a big fight in Boxborough, right, in Boxborough, and the people fight hard to keep the casino out of Boxborough. It's legal. So it's about what's the character of our town. Recreational marijuana is definitely not a character of a good school district, of a good town. It takes years effort to build up a good community, a good school district, but it can be destroyed quickly if we have, if we are not careful, we just go ahead and implement something without really know what's the consequence. And marijuana, right now, our school has drug issues. Right? We really deeply care our school. Acton is well known for best school in Massachusetts. But do we want Acton be well known as the recreational marijuana center? So here, and also another argument regarding this legalization is in the latest state law, it specified the process the town can opt out recreational marijuana. If we go through this democratic process and make this decision, that's the right thing to do. So we plead to the Board of Selectmen to honor the will of Acton resident we want to eventually ban recreational marijuana store. So we want to have this ballot vote in spring town hall or in November town hall. That's right in the article petition. We did the article really just in a couple of days. So we see the overwhelming support among our residents. So we hope the will of the people can be honored in the democratic process. Thank you. And I hope we can protect our town's character and set a good role model for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Ally. Yes.
Hi, I'm Corinne Hogseth. I live on Seminole Road. I think Ally may have just answered me. What's the earliest that this could appear on a ballot for a ban? Would it be next November?
No, it would be on local ballots. Would be next March.
So it would be March. So if in September we vote for a moratorium, which I totally support, we would then have the opportunity to have a ban on the March ballot?
Yeah, the moratorium and the ban are sort of exclusive. They're separate.
Right.
They don't. One doesn't hinge on the other. So.
Okay. So when you said there's a two-step process for towns like Acton, and one of them is the ballot. What's the other step? The
town meeting.
Okay.
You have to have two. Yeah.
Okay. So it would be
if it passes at the ballot, the ballot question passes, then
then
you
it
go
goes
to
to
town meeting
in April. So we'd be voting on a moratorium in December, and then possibly a ban in April, March and April.
Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to iron that out.
Procedurally, yeah.
Thank
it's
you.
a little complicated.
Okay. That being said, I support the moratorium. I support the ban. Most of the towns around us have already put them in place. We would be the donut hole where people could come in to get recreational pot. 115 towns in the state have already put bans and moratorium in place. So clearly the NIMBY thing is out there, and other people have already said it. There's a big difference to us between, people want to smoke in their house and have a couple plants in their house versus having a shop down the street. Most of us see a big difference between the two. I said it at a planning board meeting last week. I see no reason for Acton to lead the charge on this. Let's see how the other towns work out the kinks. Let's see if the costs, outweigh, or, if there's costs that, I'm not saying this right, if the costs outweigh the benefits outweigh the costs. Let's see how that works out for the other towns. I can't see any upside in this for Acton. So I hope you will support putting the moratorium on the December town meeting ballot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Danny Factor, 11 Davis Road. First of all, I do want to just distinguish between, the concept of moratorium and ban. I understand, while I may not completely agree, I understand with the idea that people who support a moratorium until the Cannabis Committee comes out with reasonable regulations. I think people can choose to agree or disagree on that, but I think those are reasonable positions on each side. I was a little concerned with one comment that was made from the board saying that the board might not always take an opinion just because something is a citizen's petition. I do think that the board, whatever the board decides, the board should take an opinion on this citizen's petition. And I think the major reason is that there's been a lot of talk about a more democratic process. But I think that the Board of Selectmen should vote against the idea of a vote on a ban. I think that the idea that this vote would be a democratic process is really a naive view of democracy. Democracy is about something much larger. It's about having a diverse community. And one of the things I resent the most from some of these speakers is this attack on the character of our town and the attack on the character of people in our town who might choose to engage in this legal activity. So I think that if we really are a democratic town, that means diversity. And that means looking at, at something much wider, seeing voting as one of the vehicles in which we create democracy, but also the responsibility that we have towards people's civil rights and protecting people's dignity as well. So for these reasons, I really resent the attack that people are making to say that somehow, if we were to allow this, and we would not be the donut hole necessarily, because many of the towns are passing moratoriums and not bans, but this idea that it would reflect badly on our character is really an insulting statement and anti-democratic. So for those reasons, I think that the board should take a firm decision, no, on the idea of such a vote on a ban. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make Danny did talk about the distinction between a moratorium and a ban, but I think it's important to know that the Attorney General, in reviewing moratorium articles, has ruled that a moratorium can only be for 1 year. So you've got, in essence, a year to kind of study the issue, but after a year, the moratorium goes away.
Am I permitted to speak a third time?
Yeah,
Thank
go
you.
ahead. It's robust discussion.
Yes. I just wrote down 2 things, and I'll read them as I wrote them down. The misperception of voters who did not understand the impact of the vote is no reason to rescind the law. Ignorance in voting is not a qualified reason to overturn what the citizenry has already chosen to legalize. Point number 2, the establishment of stores and or cultivation in town is not going to, it's an absurd notion that it will make Acton the cannabis hub of this county. Because as the person who just went ahead of me very eloquently stated, there are other towns that are simply in moratorium, and moreover, the likelihood that people are going to flock to Acton as opposed to, say, Cambridge or Boston or towns where there's going to be, perchance, many, many more stores is just rather absurd.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Jeannie. I live in 16 Lexington Drive. And so here I do like the Board of Selectmen to support the moratorium and also to recommend the ban of recreational marijuana store in Acton. So I just want to talk my experience. So when I volunteer to collect the signature for the moratorium, so I go to my neighbor and I knock the door. So originally I think I should knock the door like who support, right? But I do want to find out how people think in their mind. So I literally knocked door by door. I didn't skip any of them. So I knocked in 1.5 hours or almost 2 hours. I knocked about 25 houses, and I got one said she's not ready to sign because she need to find out more and she need to more research on the issue, and the other one said he doesn't want to support the moratorium bylaw. Okay, and the rest of them they do support, and not only they are supporting and sign, they also very willing to sign and also thank me and appreciate my effort. So I do feel most of people, residents in our community, do support the moratorium and also to ban the recreational marijuana store in Acton. So I think, based on all my experience, if Board of Selectmen, if you recommend and support this moratorium and the ban of recreational marijuana store in Acton, you will be appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thank you for getting so engaged in the process, your political process. Thank you.
My name is Yinmu. I'm living 17 Hazelnut Street. It's pretty late. I appreciate you guys spend effort and run this meeting. Thank you very much. I was not planning to talk, so I will be very short. Tonight, it's a pretty good topic. We talk about the school project. I mean, 100 millions we are going to spend. For what? Build a school? I mean, student? That's the major product for a town. It's a school, it's a student. I urge Board of Selectmen, you guys vote, to support Acton Cares petition to ban marijuana, recreational stuff in town of Acton for our kids, for our school, for our community. Thank you. Personally, I just want to comment on the previous gentleman's comments. He used diversity, whatever term again. I think that's abuse. We don't want recreational marijuana. We don't want to call that as diversified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chetar Vidhate. I live in Patriot Hill. I would like to take a reference of the earlier presentation made by school building project. They mentioned that there was like 60%, 65% increase in house sales after 2013, between 2013 and 2016. If you see it closely, most of the new house owners, they came here because of the school, good school district. That is the main reason the housing cost is more compared to neighboring towns here. So that is a clear. I am one of the new house owner. I moved here recently 2.5 years back for the same reason that there is no commercialization and there is no there is one of the best school district here. So the decision of the new house owner is totally based on the school district here. And if we introduce the recreational marijuana, that will put a different picture in front of all those new house searchers such as mine. So I would like all Board of Selectmen to support this citizens petition. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm gonna just let these last two talk. I don't expect that we're gonna hear anything new, but go ahead.
Yeah, Angie So in Bylaw from. So I just want to bring two more facts, the data that I collected. One is the marijuana business is still at the current moment is mostly it's cash business because the federal bank, they cannot make the loan to the business. So there is most of the business in Colorado are still cash based. The second point is I'm trying to make, which is the data collected for the first time in 2016, the marijuana usage has outpaced the tobacco use, and that is after the legalization and the commercialization of the marijuana use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I just want to comment on the idea of our major product being students. I'll attribute that to language difficulties, or a barrier. I want to say that I went to school here in Acton, and Acton was always very proud of our McCarthy town and the idea of allowing kids to do what they want to do and not to over-regulate them. We grow up kids to make good decisions based on real life experiences, and that was an innovative thing back then. And Acton's McCarthy Town School was considered revolutionary at the time, and I think that a lot of what we learned there was adopted. And so I think that we should vote no on this because we have good students and because we want to have good students. The idea of going door to door, how you present the petition is always very critical into who signs or doesn't sign. And if you open the door and you say, would you like to sign this thing that'll protect our kids from dangerous drugs? Of course they're going to sign. If you open the door and they say, would you like to, if I was doing a petition against a ban, I could say, do you want to protect our kids against over-regulation of healthy materials that are grown organically? You get the same person to sign both petitions. And the last thing I want to ask is, Steve, if either of these things pass, moratorium or the ban, is any of that criminalize the selling of pot, or does somebody who wants to set up an operation and pay, the fine every day? I mean, what happens if somebody disobeys the moratorium?
That I don't know. Possession has been decriminalized for a few years, but are you talking about if somebody opened a store?
If somebody opened a store that wasn't permitted, or...
Well, I mean, it's all regulated by the state, so I don't think there's a way to do that.
Well, I'm just pointing out that I'm not sure that a ban would really change anything. Thank you. Or a ban or a moratorium. Thank you.
And Tara, I don't think that there was any language barrier in the comment about...
The products?
Well, students, I have heard other people, okay, where definitely there's no language barrier, who have said that education is the major business in this town. They were kind of complaining about, the taxes and the proportion of the taxes that go to the schools.
I will rescind my comment about the language barrier.
It is. I mean, it's said in other towns. So.
I will object vehemently, look, Robert's teaching me new language, new words, vehemently against the idea of labeling our students as a product or as Acton as a manufacturing plant. Thank you very much. Our schools as a manufacturing plant for humans. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all for presenting, for commenting on this issue. I think now we're going to turn to our last item, which is the board is to talk about, take positions on the warrant articles, and then we also have to sign them, and then we will go through the consent agenda, and then we will be done. So, bless you.
I'll start us off and
Yeah.
Wait, Steve wanted to say something?
No.
Should talk about selectmen assigned articles too.
Yeah, why don't we, I would say, I don't know if you want to sign, I mean, I have some suggestions for assignments. I think, Katie, you should get the regional school building.
Yeah. I can take
161 Newtown Road.
I can take two because I'm open space as well.
Well, I was thinking I could give that to Peter because he's CP.
Oh, yeah, either way.
Just to have.
Neither of us is making the presentation, so it's just our position.
I mean, honestly, the zoning stuff goes to Joan. I will take the marijuana establishment, the two marijuana items, just because I've kind of been pulled into the middle of that. And then I would just give Ching-Sung all of the consent agenda items. That's
sure.
Is that, I mean, it's just, I don't anticipate, I don't know, I have to talk with the planning board chairman, but I don't anticipate having to do anything other than to talk from the stage, but anyhow. So let's go through the article, starting with the first one. It's the school building project. Does somebody want to?
I'll make a motion to recommend Article 1.
Second.
Okay, so Katie moves and Joan and Ching-Sung second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining.
Make a motion to recommend Article 2.
Second.
So Katie moves and Ching-Sung seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining.
Okay, I'll make a motion to recommend Article 3.
Second. Katie moves and Joan seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining.
I will make a motion to recommend Article 4.
Second.
Katie moves and Ching-Sung seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining.
All right, I'll make a motion to remove Article 5 from the warrant.
Second.
Katie moves and Ching-Sung seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. You want me to move on marijuana? I know you have your...
Yeah, well, I'll make my comments on both of these, 6 and 7. Personally, I will support Article 6 solely because I think giving us the time to wait for the Cannabis Control Commission to come out with their regulations, and then for the town to have time to adapt to those regulations and come up with zoning or other things makes sense. And I'll repeat my comments that I made at the last time we discussed about this, and I will not be supporting the non-binding resolution. Again, I understand and appreciate the idea of going through the democratic process. The state has gone through the democratic process. We voted to support question 4, and this town voted to support question 4, and close to 13,000 people came to vote for that and voted on that article. And our local elections tend to have between 300 and 600 people, and so saying that 300 to 600 people who are realistically going to show up at a local election to vote on this issue is as democratic as 13,000 people in the town voting on this issue is frankly absurd and disappointing. And I'm severely disappointed in people who voted for the article but don't want to have this in their town, because it's just the epitome of NIMBYism, and it's saying, I want access to marijuana, but I think I want the people who live in Cambridge or Lynn or Boston or elsewhere to have to deal with what I perceive as any potential problems. And whether there will be potential problems or not, I do not know, and I'm not inclined to think that they will be as drastic as the folks supporting this are. But again, my number one complaint with this is the idea of bringing it to a local election. This is what the other towns in the state who have already voted bans have primarily done, and I think that it's sad and a devious way to go around the will of the people. So if we're supporting the democratic process, then come back in 4 years and put this on a presidential ballot, and I would support that, because that is the time that we will get 13,000 people out to vote again. I wish that all 13,000 people came to vote out in my in our local. That's how many people voted in our last presidential election. And if 13,000 people came out to vote in our local elections, that would be incredible and wonderful, and I wish that we had that happen, but we don't. We have, when there's a contested election, maybe 1,000 people. And that's, unfortunate, and I would like to see more, but having this on this question on the petition, on a ballot, local ballot, is not going to bring that many people out, and it's just going to have the will of a very small percentage of our town, as opposed to the large percentage that have already voted on this. So again, I will support Article 6, but not Article 7.
All right, I think we need to talk about what we want to do with these articles. I assume that everybody, well, should we, but I mean, do we want to adopt what Mr. Faulkner was saying, which was we take a position on the non-binding resolution as opposed to just not taking a position?
So we take them on citizens petitions all the time and on non-binding resolutions.
Okay, because sometimes we just don't. Yeah, I mean, it just, all right, well, why don't we start with the moratorium article, Article 6. Is there, I'll move to recommend. So Janet moves and Jones seconds. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Abstaining? Okay, so that's 4 and 1, okay. All right, I will move to recommend Article 7. Second. Okay, Janet moves and Joan seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Well, go ahead.
All right, can we have a little bit more discussion on this?
You want to have,
Article 7
okay, go
you're
ahead,
talking
yeah,
about?
well, okay.
You're moving to recommend it?
Well, I am, but this is for discussion purposes. It
Okay.
doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to vote to support it.
All right,
Because I don't know if anybody will move to recommend. That's,
I am, I'm going to vote against recommending this non-binding resolution. I think it's a very difficult decision. It's been presented as a issue which goes to the health and welfare of our youth. Clearly that is a top priority of everybody in town. I'm a parent of 2 children who went through the entire AB school district, and I'm now a grandparent. So obviously that's my top priority. It seems to me the social issues that people have raised were all debated during the lead up to the election on this issue. I voted in favor of legalizing recreational marijuana because I don't believe that prohibition has worked. Is it going to be more accessible if there's a recreational marijuana store in town? I doubt it. It's so widely accessible now. It seems to me it's hard to imagine it being more accessible. Right now, all of the money that is paid for recreational marijuana goes to criminals and drug cartels. So it seems to me that regulation is a better solution to the problem. You know, is it a gateway to harder drugs? I think there are studies that can conclude both ways on that. But again, it seems to me that if you got to go to a criminal to buy marijuana, it's more likely that criminal is also going to be selling harder drugs. And that may be one reason why some people who use marijuana do get into using harder drugs. And finally, if we have I did vote to support the moratorium that will go through the end of next year, assuming it passes at town meeting. And the reason I supported that is I want to see what the regulations are about how these establishments are going to be controlled and what conditions are going to be put on advertising and a whole range of issues that haven't been settled yet. And it seems to me to be inconsistent to have a moratorium that will allow us to have more experience with how these are going to roll out. While that's happening, vote to ban establishments in the town. So for those reasons, I'm going to oppose recommending this article.
Okay, well, I have never been supportive of pursuing a ban before we got to see the regulations. I know there are some people who think that we shouldn't even have a moratorium to give us time to look at the regulations. I happen to think that's a prudent thing for us to do because honestly, the regulations are going to fill in a lot of the gaps in the laws, and it may, who knows, there may be assurances about how all of this product is going to be managed. I mean, I do have some concerns about edibles because those are always making the headlines. I mean, people who are unsuspecting get a hold of them and things happen, and some of the edibles look a lot like the Halloween candy that some of us were handing out, or at least trying to hand out. It's all ended up in my mouth and not in any little kids' mouths because we didn't get any kids. But I support the moratorium. I have reservations about the ban. I do respect all the residents who have come out and supported the ban, but some of the arguments do give me pause. References to the gateway drug argument, really, I'm a baby boomer. I went to college in the 70s, and that was an argument that, well, we all heard and disregarded. Now, I know that marijuana today is a much different product than it was in my college days, but, I think that there are people who get into drugs, including into illegal drugs, or they use legal drugs inappropriately, who probably also have some underlying mental health problems. There are people out there who are self-medicating, and nobody talks about, differentiating the population of people who have issues that they're trying to grapple with and people who don't. So for a lot of reasons, I'm not really completely persuaded by the arguments by people supporting the ban. That said, I'd like to control the process, but first I want to see the regulations. I don't think it would be wise for us to have a ban before we've even seen what the regulations are going to provide. The page in the law talking about what the Cannabis Control Commission is authorized to do goes on for at least 2 pages, very detailed. So I can imagine that their regulations are going to be even more detailed. I don't think it's going to be a free-for-all where, you can just put up a shingle and do whatever you want to without some sort of requirements, in the interest of public health. So anyhow, although I've made a motion to recommend, I am probably not going to support my own motion. So are there any other comments before we vote? Joan?
I am going to support this article. I think the citizens have gone to a lot of trouble to gather signatures to put it on the warrant, and I, for one, am going to support them.
Are we ready to vote? We had a motion and second, right, a long time ago? Okay, so any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. All right, so
Abstaining?
I'll make a motion to not recommend Article 7,
Second.
Why are we doing
Okay.
that?
because you have to not
You have to
recommend. We
move-
don't,
okay,
otherwise
Katie.
we have no position on
okay.
it.
Yeah, we,
Okay.
yeah, Katie moves and Ching Sung seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstaining, okay. Article 8, these are all the...
Can I make a motion to approve
All of the consent.
Articles 8 through 12?
Second.
Okay, Katie moves and Joan seconds. Any further discussion? for
Yeah, I have to abstain on the article about Faulkner Hill Road because I
Okay.
live down the street from that. So
Okay. So do
other
you
than
want me
that,
to-
I was...
So should I take that out, not do them all as a chunk?
Yeah, why don't
You
we-
know, I don't need to walk out of the room. We're not,
Yeah,
we're
we'll
going to
just-
discuss it
we'll
as
just-
long as
we'll
I'm
just-
recorded as abstaining on that particular...
Well, we can adjust the numbers. We'll just do it as if, Peter, we had
Right.
voted it separately. But, you know, yeah, this is not a real formal process, so.
Yeah,
So-
okay. So I've still got my motion.
Wait a minute, so Katie, you moved and who seconded? Did you?
I did.
Okay, Joan seconded. Okay, all those in favor with allowances for Peter's vote on Faulkner Hill Road of all of those consent agenda items, say aye. Aye.
Now, is
Opposed?
this the order that they will be on the warrant?
That's the other thing that we need to talk about is, I know that the CARES advocates had asked that the 2 marijuana articles go earlier because I think they basically don't want to be hanging around at town meeting.
Because Brookside and the shopping center.
So before, if you could,
Go
put-
with the rest of the,
we could move them up to just after 161 Newtown Road.
yeah.
I just feel like we tend to put citizens petitions at the end, typically is what we do, and there's no reason for me
No,
to see us
there was
putting
one
them.
citizens petition I recall that had to do with the nursing service that was,
Oh, we had a whole special time meeting
There
that was
was-
just about nursing. There wasn't other
but
issues
it
on
was,
it.
it was right up front, I don't know.
Right, but that was the entire purpose of that special town meeting. This is not the purpose of that special town meeting, and it's a zoning article, it makes sense to go with zoning, and it wouldn't be odder to me to have zoning, non-binding resolution, zoning, as opposed to
And, well,
just.
the other thing is I don't want to stick it to the planning board.
Right.
Have-
So
once
we tend to
once
put
again, I
staff
don't know,
ones
but
first.
I have reservations about, because I have a feeling that, the discussion is going to be pretty
Right.
lengthy.
So I think.
I'm sorry, what's the question now? You
The
decided?
question is that the CARES group, the advocates had asked that the 2 marijuana articles be moved earlier, because right now they're after the zoning, because, well, one of them is a zoning article. I mean, the other one will eventually, if it gets beyond the ballot vote state, be a zoning thing, but the idea is to put them with zoning, and it's also, well, anyhow.
I mean, Brookside and shopping center aren't going
but-
to take as long as
Yeah,
marijuana
I don't think,
questions.
now that we pulled that one thing off, I think it's
Right.
not going to be that, I don't think any of these things, the school presentation is going to take a while, then there's the land, and then, absent some sort of opposition to Brookside, which seems as if it's not going to materialize unless the owner changes in the next several weeks, then that should be a fairly quick vote. And we took out the one.
As you know, people can always make a motion to take articles out of order, too.
Right, right. Well, I don't know if
takes
you know that, though. So, why don't we, since it's not, it doesn't make any difference. I just thought I would bring it up. I said there were no guarantees. So if everybody is comfortable with where they are right now, we'll just leave them. Do people have strong opinions?
I would like to move them up just because of babysitting.
Yeah, we've got other zoning, again, I state my case to keep them where they are. We have town staff ones that almost always go first. They're gonna take significantly less time. There's no reason to make the people who care more about Brookside shops and, don't think anybody really cares deeply about shopping center parking.
I think,
It's gonna
you know,
take
my
10
concern
minutes.
is, you know, is that this is going to take, there is going to be a lot of discussion about it. And you know, frankly, every time we have to put together a warrant, there are people who want jockey for position. They want to be, you know, the first, early in the first night, or the very first one in the second night. And, you know, part of the town meeting process and becoming civically engaged is to go through the whole meeting, because something that you care about is toward the end, and, you know.
I just don't see a reason for, like Katie said, for these to be at the front of the zoning articles. It makes more sense for them to be where they are, or it makes more sense for them to be Articles 1 and 2. And I really don't think they should be Articles 1 and 2.
No, they're not, no.
So,
School building, I mean, I think the articles.
No, I agree, that's my point, is that, like, I
Okay,
think that the
let's-
logical position for these two articles is where they are, or
Okay.
for them to be Articles 1 and 2, and I think it's better for given
Okay.
those two options, for them to be where they are.
Okay, so there are two definitely well, essentially, forget it, yeah. They're not going to be 1 and 2, so they're going to be where they are. And Peter, do you have an opinion one way or the other? Just,
I agree, they could stay where they are.
okay, that's enough for me, you know, so we're going to leave it the way it is, so are we done? We have to do a consent agenda, all right. Consent is unusual, we usually get through it, but because we didn't have very many hearings, just went right through. Consent agenda, item 7, approval of the Elizabeth White Fund grants for 2017. Item 8, use of surplus plus loans proceeds. Item 9, approved meeting minutes, July 10, 12, August 7, September 11, 25, October 16, 2017. Item 10, accept gifts, Council on Aging, board to accept a gift totaling $190 for building furnishings for the senior center. Item 11, accept gift Acton Nursing Services, board to accept a gift of $300 from Alma Sandman. Item 12, accept gift Natural Resources, board to accept a gift totaling $240 from Eagle Scout candidate Jeremy Dwaron to be used towards future conservation land trail projects. Item 13, accept gift Recreation Department, board to accept a gift totaling $200 from Anonymous to be used for funding a new recreational facility and playground at Jones Field. Item 14, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Rushi Agarwal, Nagod Woods Clubhouse, December 31, 2017. Item 15, request to dispose of obsolete items, Acton Memorial Library.
Motion to approve consent agenda items 7 through 15.
Second.
Katie moves, Joan seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. Is there a motion to?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Katie moves, and is that Ching Sung seconding? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining.